Chapter 425. Ning Ke was very satisfied with his performance in the pavilion. His words directly made Su Shi feel sad, and he was not in the mood to continue the interrogation. However, he did not expect such a situation to await him after his words. Looking at Wang Jinglu taking out the challenge certificate issued by the Imperial Center Administration, Ning Ke thought that this was really boring. As expected, they were going to fight again. It was really cliché. And if Su Shi was going to use the powerhouses in the military to directly beat him down, then with his prestige and status, why did he talk so much with him? Did Su Shi really expect to use words to move him to tears and make him deeply repent so that he would surrender to the military ministry and admit that he killed those people? This idea was also very cliché. However, no matter how cliché it was, Wang Jinglu was already standing in front of him with a very gentle expression and firm eyes. It was obvious that he wanted to fight. Ning Ke had never seen Wang Jinglu, but he had heard of him. Anyone who dared to call himself the first person below the knowing destiny state deserved to be vigilant. And he had heard a story from his master, Yen Sei. 2 years ago, on a rainy night in the Spring Breeze Pavilion, he killed people on the Second Heng Street, and Wang Jinglu was waiting in the horse carriage in the middle of the street. They should have met, but they were separated by a divine Jing talisman. I have learned the Jing talisman. Ning Ke looked at Wang Jinglu and said happily, not like showing off, but like announcing good news. Wang Jinglu was not happy and said with a sad expression, I was kicked by His Majesty to the general, and it was said that it was also Master Yen Sei's idea. I am very grateful to him. Why do you use him to humiliate me? Ning Ke said, I am telling the truth. I don't want to humiliate you. Since there is some fate between us, why do we have to fight? Wang Jinglu held the paper in his hand and sighed, this is the first challenge certificate issued by the Imperial Center Administration in 10 years. Do you think it's possible not to fight? Ning Ke looked at Su Shi and said sarcastically, it's okay to push outsiders to challenge me, but now you want the powerhouses in the military to fight me. Did you forget that we are all Tangs? Su Shi looked at the scenery outside the fence and said nothing. Since he broke through the cliff cave, Ning Ke's cultivation state had rapidly improved to the upper see-through state. Otherwise, he would not be able to use such a powerful knife. However, the upper see-through state was still below the knowing destiny state. Facing Wang Jinglu, who was known to be invincible below the knowing destiny state, he did not have the confidence to defeat him. I don't accept the challenge. Ning Ke said, although the Academy seems to have the obligation to accept challenges after entering the human realm, you are a soldier of the Tang Empire. If this matter is spread out, both you and I will lose face. Wang Jinglu said, as I said, I can afford to lose face, so I can afford to lose face. In terms of shamelessness, you are no match for me. Ning Ke looked at him and said. Then, he walked to the edge of the pavilion and looked at the meadow and forest opposite. He shouted, have you finished that thing? As soon as he finished speaking, a young man who was much fatter than Wang Jinglu walked out from the depths of the forest. He rubbed his hands and moved his feet even slower than a girl from a wealthy family. It was obvious that he did not want to enter the building. Ning Ke shouted at him, if you don't come, I will be beaten to death. The young fatty was furious. He raised his head and shouted upstairs, aren't you afraid that I'll be beaten to death? Ning Ke glanced at Su Shi, who was standing by the railing not far away, and said, some people are too proud of their status to kill a fat man like you. The sound of footsteps rang out. Chen Pipi climbed up the stairs panting and walked into the pavilion. He first bowed respectfully to Su Shi, who was standing by the railing, and then looked at Wang Jinglu and said, you have to fight with me first. Wang Jinglu looked at Chen Pipi in front of him and thought of the finger attack he received in the Chang and local government on New Year's Day. His expression became more and more bitter, and he said helplessly, why is it you again? Ning Ke explained, in the whole second floor of the academy, I can only order him around. Wang Jinglu smiled bitterly and said, he is invincible below the knowing destiny state. After all, he is below the knowing destiny state. I am no match for Mr. 12. But before that, I would like to ask Mr. 13 for advice. Chen Pipi shook his head and took out a thick stack of papers from his arms. He licked his chubby fingers and took out the top one and handed it to Wang Jinglu. The challenge permission from the Imperial Center Administration. This permit was issued and stamped earlier than yours, Li Yao said. I have 62 permits issued by the Imperial Center Administration, and each one is earlier than yours. So even if you want to fight with Ning Ke, you have to finish these 62 rounds with me first. Wang Jinglu was stunned. He took the stack of papers and looked through them. Even though he was not afraid of anything and was still not afraid when he was knocked down by Chen Pipi in the Chang and local government that day, he was finally afraid. Failure was not terrible. But what if he lost 62 rounds in a row? At this time, Chen Pipi did not use the natural stream magical finger with the no-boundary spirit of the academy. Ning Ke shook his head and did not accept this explanation. Chen Pipi said with shame and annoyance, your sweat has dried into salt flowers, and you still have the nerve to say that to me. Ning Ke said slowly like the eldest brother, I am just in the see-through state, and I am involved, so it is normal for me to be afraid. Senior brother, you are a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. This is embarrassing. Chen Pipi suddenly stopped and looked at him seriously. He said, do you know what kind of person Su Shi is? Ning Ke shook his head. Chen Pipi said, he is one of the most powerful figures in the world. Previously in the attic, if he wanted to, he could kill people like you and me on the street with just a wave of his hand. Ning Ke thought, why didn't I feel it? The most terrifying thing is his identity as the Defender General of the state. He holds the military power of the Tang Empire in his hands, and has countless powerhouses under his command. He has tens of thousands of cavalry, and can sweep thousands of miles. Chen Pipi said, you want me to fight with such a bigwig? Why should I not be afraid? Ning Ke said sarcastically, then why should I not be afraid? Because you are an idiot. Chen Pipi reprimanded him bluntly, even Liu Bai would be too afraid to eat or drink to fight with the entire Tang Empire's military, but you don't take it seriously. If you are not an idiot, then what are you? Ning Ke asked, what about youngest uncle back then? Chen Pipi said, youngest uncle faced the whole world back then. But what makes you think you can compete with youngest uncle? Ning Ke said, of course I am not as good as youngest uncle, but I am more shameless than him. Chen Pipi corrected him, you are more shameless. Ning Ke didn't bother to correct him. He suddenly thought of the conversation in the general's mansion yesterday, and asked seriously, are cultivators really no match for the army? Chen Pipi said, more or less. Ning Ke shook his head and said, but I don't believe it. Chen Pipi pointed at the wild geese that were like little black dots in the sky and said, if there are tens of thousands of sharp arrows flying towards you like wild geese, what will you do? Use the no-boundary spirit of the academy to change the direction of the wind? Or use the great spirit of righteousness to fight against it? No matter how you fight against it, you will die. Ning Ke said, with my cultivation, of course I can't. What about you? Chen Pipi sighed and said, if I can defeat the cavalry of the Tang Empire alone, I might as well change my name to headmaster of the academy. Ning Ke said, when you were scared by second brother into the forest, you waved your sleeves and ran more than 100 feet away. You were so light and graceful. I think the arrows of the army can't hurt you. Chen Pipi said proudly, of course I am graceful. Then his face turned bitter and he said, but you can't always be graceful. You can't eat being graceful. You have to stop to rest and meditate. How can you be graceful then? Ning Ke was silent. Chen Pipi asked, what are you thinking about? Ning Ke said, I am thinking whether you and second brother have violated the law of the Tang Empire. Chen Pipi was a little nervous and asked, why are you thinking about this? Ning Ke said, if you and second brother have violated the law of the Tang Empire, I will report it to the officials and let Su Shi deal with you. Chen Pipi said, I don't care, but second brother is not afraid. Ning Ke said, Su Shi said that even someone like second brother can be killed by his armored black cavalry. Chen Pipi sighed and said, I didn't expect that the Defender General of the state also likes to brag. Let me explain a few words to you. I have read many of the book reviews. They are well written and their thinking is much deeper and more wonderful than mine. But for the story of Jiang Yi, I have reported it at the beginning. There will be joys and sorrows, and it will have its own world structure. But it must be simple, and I want to write it interesting so that everyone can be relaxed and happy. So it will not be so complicated. My ability is limited, and I really can't think of too complicated and novel a story. That's all. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 426. Ning Ke asked, what do you mean? Chen Pipi said, even if the armored cavalry is invincible, second brother has legs. Can't he run away? Ning Ke said, you just said that he can't run away. I'm me, and second brother is second brother. Chen Pipi said, he runs faster than me. I think even your big black horse can't catch up with him. Ning Ke suddenly thought of a question and said, the problem is, if second brother is surrounded by the army, with his character, will he run away? Chen Pipi thought for a while and said, indeed, he won't. Ning Ke said regretfully, it seems that no one can defeat 10,000 people. Chen Pipi shook his head and said, I think even if second brother is surrounded by 10,000 people, he won't run away. But he risked his life to kill 2,000 people, and the rest will naturally collapse. Ning Ke said, that makes sense. Then he sighed and said, such a scene makes me feel hot. It's a pity that I won't have the chance to see it. They chatted along the way and walked out of the meadow and forest. They came to the side of Vermilion Bird Avenue and were about to part. Ning Ke cupped his hands and bowed to him. He said sincerely, thank you, senior brother. Chen Pipi looked at him and sighed. Ning Ke was silent. Chen Pipi suddenly asked, why? Ning Ke knew what he was asking about. Why did he kill people? Why did he fight against the Tang army? Why did he seem to be hostile to the general who had not returned yet? He looked down at the grass in front of his feet and remained silent. He would not admit anything in front of General Su Shi. In front of the world, he would definitely say that he was as clean as a little white flower. But he did not want to hide it from Chen Pipi. So he raised his head and looked into Chen Pipi's eyes. He said calmly, Xiaofan killed my whole family. Hearing this answer, Chen Pipi was slightly shocked and his cheeks rippled. After a long silence, he reached out his chubby hand and patted his shoulder to comfort him. Then you do have a reason to be angry. Xiaofan is not an ordinary person. There is no way for you to assassinate him. With your current level of cultivation, even if you think of something, you won't be able to assassinate him. Chen Pipi looked at Ning Ke and said worriedly, after all, he is a general of the Tang Empire and a visiting professor of West Hill. His status and influence are completely different. Even if the headmaster doesn't care about this matter, eldest brother definitely won't agree and second brother won't help you. I'm no match for Xiaofan. Ning Ke understood his words and was greatly moved. Finally, Chen Pipi asked, what do you plan to do when Xiaofan returns to Chang'an at the end of autumn? Ning Ke shook his head and answered, I don't know. Tang Imperial Palace. The palace, which had been washed by the rain for a day and a night, looked especially majestic and magnificent under the azure sky. Su Shi had been looking at this palace for decades. He was very familiar with it and was not tired of it. Just like his body now, although he was old and his old lung disease had not disappeared, he was still as tall and straight as when he first entered the military camp. He was still full of passion and attachment to the army. The emperor put down the bowl and frowned, seeming to dislike the bitterness. He waved his hand to signal the eunuch to leave and looked at the old general beside him. He said, "Although you and I both cough, our diseases are different. I can't give you this medicine. Speaking of which, I should let you rest in the south. Why do you insist on coming back?" Su Shi was very grateful for His Majesty's trust in him and even his meticulous care, but it didn't mean that he agreed with all of His Majesty's actions. He said, "The Nanxing mountain tribe submitted their surrender last spring. It's already peaceful there. We can just leave some troops outside the forest to suppress Yueluan Kingdom. Why should I stay there? Although the humidity there is good for lung disease, I'm really not used to that kind of sticky air." The emperor said, "Fine. If you want to go back to Chang'an, it's up to you. With you looking after the military ministry, I don't have to worry too much." Su Shi said, "But I have to ask your majesty to worry more about this matter." The emperor was silent. Su Shi said, "Your majesty, please write a letter to the academy and ask the headmaster of the academy to punish Ning Quebec." The emperor turned to him and asked, "Do you have any evidence?" Su Shi said, "No." The emperor asked again, "What did you say when I wanted to punish Xiao?" Su Shi said, "I didn't say anything." The emperor said, "But my brother, the prime minister, the minister of the supreme judiciary, and even the empress said that it's written clearly in the law of the Tang Empire that it's not a crime without evidence." He looked at the most loyal old general of the Tang Empire and said in a self-mocking tone, "I thought about it for several nights and didn't object." "Neither did you. Are you going to object now?" Su Shi was silent for a long time and then said, "Even if it's not a crime without evidence, I still insist that it's a terrible mistake to hand over the god-stunning array to Ning Quebec. You and Yen Sei have been friends for many years." The emperor frowned slightly and said, "Why don't you trust his successor?" Su Shi didn't explain further and just said stubbornly, "I don't trust him to take over Chang'an." The emperor pondered for a moment and said, "I trust Ning Quebec." In the old brush pen shop in the early morning, Sang Sang got up early as usual, but she didn't chop firewood, boil water, and buy breakfast as usual. She looked at Ning Kei who was sleeping soundly and quietly pushed the door open. She walked to the front berth and squatted down to rummage in a deep drawer under the display shelf for a long time. Chapter 427. Cultivators and ordinary people belonged to two different worlds. Therefore, even with the knife at the side door of the academy, Ning Kei's status in the hearts of the Tang still mainly came from his status as a great calligrapher. In the hearts of professionals like the old shopkeeper, Sir Ning's status was even more prominent. Because of his respect and admiration for Ning Kei, the shopkeeper was very disdainful of the little handmaiden, even though he could only get the package with the blue flower cloth through the little handmaiden. In the old shopkeeper's eyes, the little handmaiden stole the master's property, which was really immoral. The shopkeeper thought for a moment. He disdained the little handmaiden's behavior and could not resist the temptation of money. He asked in a low voice, since the little handmaiden stole it, she would not dare to report it to the authorities or let Sir Ning know even if we took it. "Why don't we, if you don't want to die, stop thinking about it?" Hearing the shopkeeper's words, the boss of the stone house frowned slightly and warned sternly, "Don't talk about it in the future. I heard that the little handmaiden has a special status and has a good relationship with the princess. Also, from the house of red sleeves, Sir Ning treats the handmaiden differently. Even if she was taken in by Sir Ning, the little handmaiden is just a greedy girl. She is not worthy of someone like Sir Ning." The shopkeeper suddenly thought of something and said, "Boss, Sir Ning is not an ordinary calligrapher. Will there be any problems if we sell them secretly?" The shopkeeper said, the little handmaiden is very favored and Sir Ning's seals are all kept by her. We have already obtained the sales documents, so these are not stolen goods. Even if Sir Ning finds out about this in the future, he can only blame the little handmaiden. According to the law of the Tang Empire, we are not responsible. The shopkeeper praised, "Boss, your way of doing things is really reassuring." The shopkeeper picked up the blue flower cloth package and asked, "Are they all in the side yard?" The shopkeeper nodded. The west yard of the stone house was hidden behind the main 3-story building and under the 9-turn green tree. The lake breeze was gentle and quiet here. Several men walked out of the room and greeted. Among these men, some were from the Song Kingdom, some from the South Jin Kingdom, and some from Yangguan of the Tang Empire. One of them was a master craftsman from the auspicious ink shop in Chang'an. They were all the leading figures in the appraisal of calligraphy and paintings in their respective countries. Yes, no matter whether they were gray-haired or indifferent, they all looked proud and confident. "Brother Mo Sure, you actually came too? Brother Jiafu. Who's that silent man under the grape trellis? He looks familiar. I think I met him once in the Yu Kingdom's imperial palace the year before last." As they exchanged their identities, the pride and confidence in these people's eyes gradually turned into astonishment. This was because they discovered that the reputation and status of the other people in the courtyard were not inferior to their own in the industry. Many of them had been famous for a long time, but they had never seen them before. They did not expect that they would all meet in this small courtyard today. Brother Mo Sure stroked his beard and said emotionally, "Stone House has been doing well these past few years. They managed to invite so many of us over in such a short time." The old man called Brother Jiafu shook his head and said emotionally, "If not for the fact that the items being sold this time are too rare and precious, you and I would not have gathered here." When the details of the sale were mentioned, the few men, including the silent man under the grape trellis, stood closer. They lowered their voices and began to discuss. At the same time, they wanted to see how much the other party knew about this matter. "How many scrolls are there in existence today?" "No one knows the exact number. We only know that the imperial study in the imperial palace has the most. I heard that His Majesty took more than half of them from the old brush pen shop." Brother Mo Sure said bitterly, "They are hidden in the dark imperial study. No one can see them, appreciate them, or see them. The people cannot get close to them." This is really, he wanted to criticize the Tang Emperor for going against the grain. However, even though Chang'an's politics were clear, he did not dare to say it. The manners of the Chancellor and Grand Secretary Wang each have a few copies. The other manners should have about 4 more. However, these old men have hidden them in their manners. They are even more secretive than His Majesty. They don't show them to others easily. There are many rubbings of the chicken soup calligraphy, but no one has seen the original. It is rumored that it is in Grand Secretary Wang's mansion. Before everyone became famous, some lucky people bought some authentic works at Lin 47th Street. They were sold for a very high price in the past year. Most of them disappeared after changing hands twice. There are about 12 scrolls in total. I wonder how many scrolls the stone house got this time. Is there a central section? A central section? Not even a wide one. If it is a calligraphy section, it must be more than 3. Otherwise, the owner of the stone house would not have spent so much money to invite all of us here. The calligraphy appraisers discussed heatedly. Just then, the courtyard door was pushed open. The boss of the stone house walked in with a blue floral cloth package. The crowd followed the boss back to the flower hall. Their eyes never left the blue floral cloth package in his hand. They were puzzled, but also full of anticipation. The boss gently placed the blue floral cloth package on the table. The people around the table frowned and thought that there was indeed something wrong with this. Brother Moshe carefully pinched the two corners of the paper and held it up to the sunlight outside the reception hall. He wanted to see what was wrong with it. An appraiser from the Kingdom of Song standing opposite him suddenly exclaimed and pointed at the paper. He said, "There are words." Everyone looked at the back of the paper. There was indeed a line of beautiful small words. "This is real." Who wrote this? The appraiser from the Kingdom of Song was confused and even angry. Even if this chicken soup calligraphy is a new copy, it is still an extremely valuable work. How can someone write on the back so casually? Brother Moshe shook his head and looked at the small words. He said emotionally, "Other than Sir Ning, who else can write such good words?" If it was written by him, not only would it not ruin its value, but it would add color. Is this the original copy of the chicken soup calligraphy? With Sir Ning's signature, it is naturally the original copy. Then the one that Grand Secretary Wang bought at a high price? The one from Grand Secretary Wang's house is naturally fake. Everyone was silent. Even though they were not cultivators, they had all heard of the legendary story of the chicken soup calligraphy. Especially as the rubbings of the chicken soup calligraphy spread throughout the world, many people thought that in terms of value, the chicken soup calligraphy was almost as valuable as the blooming flowers calligraphy in the imperial study. Someone murmured in shock, "How much should this be worth?" Back then, Sir Wang bought it for 4,000 taels of silver. It was said to be a friendship fake, and at that time, Sir Wang's reputation was just beginning. The man who had been silent under the grape trellis in the courtyard and was still silent after entering the reception hall suddenly said, "Give it some time to advertise. It is best to anger Grand Secretary Wang's residence." The man raised his head and looked at the owner of the stone house and the appraisers. He said, 30,000. I sold this chicken soup calligraphy. If it is less than 30,000, I will be too ashamed to face anyone. As he said this, the silent man no longer looked dull. He looked extremely confident and proud, as if he had pulled out a cold sharp blade from a rusty scabbard. Everyone finally recognized who this silent man was. This man was the most famous seller in the calligraphy and painting industry. Very good. The owner of the stone house stood up and suddenly remembered Dewdrop's words. After thinking for a moment, he looked at the seller and said, "But there is a rule that needs to be written. Sir Ning has the right to choose the buyer." The man frowned slightly because he had rarely heard of such a request. The owner did not explain too much. The reason why he did this was because the origins of the 7 calligraphy sections were somewhat dishonorable. Even though the stone house did not have to bear any responsibility according to the law of the Tang Empire, if this matter were to be exposed, the stone house had to be prepared for the calligraphy sections to be taken back. Writing such a rule in advance was firstly to give Sir Ning face. Secondly, the sale was invalid, and it was also to appease the big shots who were qualified to buy the calligraphy sections. I don't know why I feel so uncomfortable. Maybe it's because of my laziness. I'll only write 1 chapter today and 3 chapters tomorrow. If I don't pressure myself, I'm useless. Damn. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Ning Ke said, the first 6 sections can be sold at least 8 or 10,000 yuan, right? The most important thing is that last chicken soup calligraphy. I don't know how much it will sell for. Sang Sang asked doubtfully, is that chicken soup calligraphy the original? Ning Ke nodded and looked at the array pestle that was placed in an inconspicuous corner of the display rack. He said, the chicken soup calligraphy has always been wrapped on the pestle that my master asked you to pass to me. Then he sighed and said, my master is an old liar. I am very touched. This sentence was both a tease and a sigh. It was mostly because of his conversation with General Su Shi a few days ago. Su Shi insisted that Master Yen Sei was a righteous person. Now that it was proven that his late master was indeed a troublemaker, Ning Kai could not help but feel gratified. Sang Sang said worriedly, "I'm just worried that old scholar Wang will be angry." Ning Kai laughed and said, "He wants to buy the chicken soup calligraphy from my master with 4,000 taels of silver. Who else would my master lie to if not Lord Wang?" Sang Sang said, "But a lie is still a lie." Ning Kai thought for a moment and asked, "Have you found out?" Sang Sang said, "Old scholar Wang was originally from Qing. In Chuan County, the clan has been planning to rebuild the ancestral temple and the genealogy. The Grand Secretary's mansion has been leading this matter and has been preparing for a few days." After eating the vegetable and bean curd porridge, Ning Kai rubbed his stomach and got on the horse carriage to the Grand Secretary's mansion. It was not Xing Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, who lived in the Grand Secretary's mansion, but Wang Shiqin, the Grand Secretary of 3 dynasties. Grand Secretary Wang Shiqin's seniority and prestige were not comparable to that of Grand Secretary Zheng. Compared to him, his temper was also much worse than that of Xing Jing. In the quiet study, old scholar Wang looked at Ning Kai in front of him. His slightly turbid eyes were spitting flames of anger. He did not care about Ning Kai's identity as a student of the 2nd floor of the academy at all. He shouted harshly, "When you were in my mansion, you stamped the chicken soup calligraphy in front of everyone. Why is there another chicken soup calligraphy now? I don't care whether it was your handmaiden who stole it or not. I just want to know why there is another chicken soup calligraphy." Ning Kai suddenly regretted it. After a long silence, he said with a bitter smile, "I did not know about this before I got the relic of my late master. I was drunk when I wrote the note in the House of Red Sleeves that night, so I did not recognize that it was a copy of my late master's in the Grand Secretary's mansion. I really did not expect him to have such an elegant hobby." "Elegant hobby? How is that elegant hobby?" Wang Shiqin's white hair fluttered in the wind. He was so angry that he could not vent his anger. He waved his trembling hands and roared angrily, "That day when I went to the Southern Gate Temple to stop him, he took out the chicken soup calligraphy from his sleeves. How is this elegant hobby? He was obviously prepared to cheat me of my money in advance." Ning Kai smiled and corrected him, "My late master must have never thought that you would be the one to be cheated." Then he said seriously, "Since that chicken soup calligraphy is a copy of my master's, it is naturally very precious. Moreover, he has already passed away, so please do not blame him anymore." Grand Secretary Wang sneered and did not reply. Ning Kai suddenly asked, "I heard that your family is rebuilding the ancestral hall." Grand Secretary Wang's expression changed slightly and he nodded. "With your prestige, the horizontal board of the ancestral hall will naturally be inscribed by His Majesty. However, do you still need someone to write the inscription tablet and the genealogy?" Ning Kai asked. Grand Secretary Wang was startled and then he understood Ning Kai's meaning. He could not help but be overjoyed. Although the chicken soup calligraphy was precious, for a large family that inherited poetry and books, the ancestral hall and the genealogy were related to the inheritance of the family. It was something to be passed on to the future generations. It would be wonderful if Ning Kai could inscribe it himself. "Thank you very much. Then I will not stand on ceremony." Grand Secretary Wang laughed and then he changed the topic and asked, "Since the calligraphy was taken by Miss Sang Sang to sell, are you going to take it back the day after tomorrow?" As an elder statesman of the Tang Empire for 3 dynasties, he naturally knew the news that Xing Jing had reunited with his daughter. Therefore, the Grand Secretary was angry about the 7 calligraphy of the old brush pen shop and had always had a deep doubt. At this time, he asked in front of Ning Quebec. Ning Kai smiled and did not answer. Grand Secretary Wang understood what he meant and said with a serious expression, "If that is the case, then I will go and buy the chicken soup calligraphy back. Will Sir Ning mind?" With a bigwig like Grand Secretary Wang entering the auction, the 7 calligraphy sections would definitely be sold at a very good price. Ning Kai only had money in his eyes and did not mind at all. He immediately smiled. Chu Yuxian got off the horse carriage and looked at the people walking towards the stone house. His expression changed slightly and he said with a trembling voice, "My father is indeed rich, but there are many people richer than him in Chang'an. Those people are royal merchants from the South City. Are you expecting me to compete with them?" Chu Yuxian's father was Master Chu, one of the 7 aristocrats in the eastern city. He was a famous wealthy merchant in Chang'an and was famous for being cultured. There was too little time between receiving the 7 calligraphy pieces from the old brush pen shop, starting the publicity, and today's official auction. There was not enough time to spread the news to the South Jin Kingdom and the other countries. Those foreign merchants also did not have the time to attend the event. The boss of the stone house could not help but feel a little regretful. He thought to himself that he should not have asked the appraiser to come over when he first received the news from the old brush pen shop. He should have just spread the news. However, the 7 calligraphy pieces from the old brush pen shop, especially the chicken soup calligraphy, was too attractive. Even though the merchants from the South Jin Kingdom and the other countries did not have the time to attend the event, the envoys from the other countries and 2 or 3 royal merchants who lived in Chang'an all year round came. From their expressions, it seemed that they were really interested. There were countless whispers in the pavilion of the stone house. No one doubted the credibility of the stone house, and naturally no one doubted the authenticity of the 7 calligraphy pieces. These buzzing discussions were probably about whether or not to bid and to analyze the strength of the competitors. As a middle-aged man in a simple green robe walked up to the platform, the discussions in the stone house gradually subsided. When the middle-aged man gently tapped the golden chime tablet in his hand, it became even more quiet. "This is the boss of the stone house?" Ning Kai asked. Chu Yuxian shook his head and pointed at the man downstairs with his folding fan. He said, "This person's surname is Zhong and his given name is Li. It is said that he is from a branch of the Zhong family in Yangguan. He had some problems with his family and was unable to become an official for many years. That was why he left Yangguan in anger and started this business. He has been working in the auction house of the Kingdom of Song all these years. Many people think that he is the best seller. Since the stone house has made such a big event today, we naturally have to invite him." When Ning Kai heard the Zhong family in Yangguan, he naturally thought of Zhong Dejun. He could not help but laugh. He said, "I hope this person is not as boring as Zhong Dejun." Chu Yuxian laughed. "Not everyone from the Zhong family in Yangguan is useless." Zhongli stood on the platform and calmly looked around at the 3 pavilions around him. Even though it was a simple glance, the people in the pavilions felt that he was looking at them. Just this move alone was enough to show the skills of a seller. Then, contrary to everyone's expectations, the seller did not introduce the history of the stone house like normal auctions, nor did he greet the bigwigs in the pavilions. Instead, he spoke directly. His voice was calm and his expression was neither servile nor overbearing. There was even a hint of pride in his voice. "Today is the 84th day of spring. It is the time for the golden jade nectar to hit the market. Everyone says that gold is common and jade is pure. However, jade is also common today. Today, I invite all of you to admire the most elegant item in the world, the beauty of 1,000 years of ink fragrance." Zhongli smiled and said, "You may be a little disappointed. Today's event does not have a prelude, nor will there be any other famous calligraphy sections. Just as gold is a common object before jade, what other calligraphy sections in the world are not common objects before the 7 sections of the old brush pen shop?" Hearing this, the nobles and businessmen in the pavilions of the stone house gasped in shock. This was because the 7 sections from the old brush pen shop were too highly praised. However, after thinking about it carefully, the people in the pavilions had to admit that even though this was a move by the stone house to raise its own status, they could not be faulted. This was because in today's world, not to mention the calligraphy masters of the past, even the works of the old masters and the works of the master of calligraphy could not compare to the glory of the old brush pen shop. As Chu Yuxian listened to the discussions and praises in the pavilion, his eyes brightened and his expression became more and more proud. He gently fanned himself and stole glances at Ning Kai from time to time. He thought to himself, if you know that the owner of the old brush pen shop is sitting right next to me, won't you die of jealousy? Damn it! Even Chuan County is prohibited. Chapter 2 will definitely be out before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 429. Chu Yuxian waved his fan proudly and felt honored. The people in the attic of the stone house were also sighing in admiration, especially the Tangs, who also felt honored. Some said that there had never been such a young calligrapher in the world. Some said that Mr. Ning was the best calligrapher in the past 1,000 years. Some said that the flower-blooming calligraphy was the best semi-cursive calligraphy, and some said that the chicken soup calligraphy was the best cursive calligraphy. Hearing these comments, Ning Kai felt uncomfortable all over. He was indeed a thick-skinned person, and he had always been very confident in his calligraphy. However, calligraphy was his true love, and he knew that he was not worthy of such an exaggerated evaluation, so he could not help but feel a little uneasy. He knew that his calligraphy was good, and could even be said to be very good. In today's world, it was definitely top-notch. However, if it was not for the coincidence that the young man had written "flower blooming on the shore" in the imperial study, and the emperor's fanatical love, and then Master Yen Sei and the academy, even if his calligraphy was praised by the calligraphers, he would not have the status he had today. He thought back to the days when the old brush pen shop's calligraphy hung on the wall of Chang'an City was met with disdain during the spring rain. There were no customers for several days, and only Cao Xiaoshu stood outside the door with an umbrella, smiling. He knew very well that the so-called reputation was mostly attached, like the makeup on a woman's face. However, no matter how clear-headed Ning Kai was and how calm he was after his self-reflection, the officials and nobles in the attic of the stone house could no longer remain clear-headed and calm after hearing Zhong Li's simple words. The seemingly simple calligraphy sections were carefully sent to the stage by the most popular courtesan after Lu Shui from the House of Red Sleeves. Then, after rounds of intense bidding, they found new owners. Hearing the increasing amount of money, Ning Kai quickly calculated how much he could get. He realized that as long as he did not lose the chicken soup calligraphy, he should be able to satisfy his needs. He could not help but smile, and looked forward to Lord Wang spending a lot of money later. As long as his reputation could earn him money, he could not be bothered with how fake his reputation was. The so-called shame and uneasiness disappeared in an instant. Chu Yuxian secretly glanced at his expression and felt that his smile was a little strange. He could not help but shiver and asked in a low voice, "What are you going to do? Which one do you want to buy? Chicken soup calligraphy?" He steeled his heart and said with a trembling voice, "I brought 50,000 taels of silver today." Ning Kai was shocked. He looked at him and asked, 50,000 taels of silver? Compared to the intense bidding of the previous 6 calligraphy sections, the silence now was unusually strange. It seemed that everyone was waiting for something. The seller, Zhongli, stood on the platform with a calm expression. He did not say a word. He did not introduce the chicken soup calligraphy, nor did he ask the previous guests for their opinion. He let the silence continue to ferment. He was not worried about the awkward silence at all. Ning Kai had never seen such a scene. He was a little worried. He was worried that the awkward silence would last too long. He was worried that the chicken soup calligraphy would not be able to sell for a high price. He had paid a great price to make up for Grand Secretary Wang's hurt feelings. Chu Yuxian had vaguely guessed Ning Kei's intention. He also guessed that the theft at the old brush pen shop was purely a rumor. He asked in a low voice, "Should I try to bid first?" Ning Kei thought for a while and said, "Let's wait for a while. Even if others don't say anything, the steward of Grand Secretary Wang's mansion will definitely bid." He thought of something and said with a frown, "I'm just worried that His Majesty has found out about this. The palace has informed the outside world, so no one dares to bid." Chu Yuxian smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about this. I heard from Jean Wuxia in the academy yesterday that His Majesty did mention about today's auction after the court meeting. He said that it was related to theft and asked the imperial court to pay attention to the situation. However, Grand Secretary Wang reprimanded him." Ning Kei only then knew that there was such a story. He could not help but laugh. His Majesty wants to find a way to sneak my things into the palace. He doesn't even think about whether the officials will be happy about it. Chu Yuxian said, "Yes, and I heard that Grand Secretary Wang and Old Chancellor made things difficult at the same time. In the end, they forced His Majesty to promise not to use the palace treasury to buy the calligraphy." Hearing this, Ning Kei felt even more gratified. Chu Yuxian said again, "But I heard that Grand Secretary Wang's mansion has said that whoever dares to snatch the chicken soup calligraphy will be against Grand Secretary Wang. Now that everyone is so quiet and no one has bid, it must be because of this." Hearing this, Ning Kei was furious. He said angrily, "This old man, I have already given him so many things, and he still dares to play this trick on me. Later, when his steward bids, if no one bids, you will bring it up for me." After a long period of silence, a voice finally rang out in the pavilion of Stone House. The voice came from the best bamboo pavilion on the east side of the third floor. Everyone knew that the steward of Grand Secretary Wang was sitting in that bamboo pavilion. The steward's voice was calm, but the price he shouted was shocking. 10,000 taels. The entire pavilion was shocked, and then the entire pavilion fell silent. Although everyone had vaguely guessed that this chicken soup calligraphy would definitely be sold at a shocking price today, no one had expected that the first bid had already surpassed the final price of the Master of Calligraphy's night preface. It had set a new record for calligraphy auctions. Ning Kei's body leaned forward slightly. When he heard the voice, he immediately relaxed and leaned back in his chair. He thought to himself that Grand Secretary Wang was quite kind. Even if no one else bid against him, he probably had enough money in his hands. Grand Secretary Wang was a senior statesman of the Tang Empire for 3 dynasties. Even princely Pei Yan had to bow to him when he entered the imperial court. Such a big shot had announced in advance, and now he bid such a high price with great sincerity. All of a sudden, the building became quiet, and it seemed that no one wanted to compete with him. Ning Kei thought so too. Then he wondered if he should ask Chu Yuxian to raise the price of the chicken soup calligraphy. Even if he did not raise it by too much, it would still be a good thing to have 2,000 or 3,000 taels of silver. Zhongli, who was on the stage, looked at the pavilion on the third floor with a calm smile. He repeated the bid from the Grand Secretary mansion. From his expression, it seemed that only he was certain that this was not the final price. Zhongli seemed to be waiting for something. As expected, just when everyone thought that the calligraphy auction was coming to an end, a voice rang out in a pavilion on the west side of the third floor of Stone House. 15,000 taels of silver. The entire pavilion was shocked again, and then the entire pavilion fell silent again. Chu Yuxian was so nervous that he felt a little hot. He kept fanning himself and walked out of the pavilion. He wanted to see clearly who dared to bid against Grand Secretary Wang. Ning Kei's mood improved. Even though Stone House had the responsibility to protect the identity and privacy of the bidders, and there were curtains made of bamboo in front of the pavilion to cover the movements inside, this was Chang'an after all. There were only a few people who could afford to enter Stone House with such status. Not long after, the identity of the bidder on the west side of the third floor was found out. Immediately, there was a lot of discussion in the pavilion. It's a royal merchant from the South Jin Kingdom who came to Chang'an to buy. Chu Yuxian panted as he walked back to his room. He wiped his sweat as he reported what he had just heard. He's actually from the South Jin Kingdom? Ning Ke was a little shocked. Even though his calligraphy was famous in the world, the South Jin Kingdom had always been hostile to the Tang Empire. The people from the South Jin Kingdom must have looked down on him, a Tang calligrapher. Why would they choose such an occasion to buy his calligraphy? One must know that this was equivalent to raising the prestige of the Tang Empire. Chu Yuxian said, I heard that the royal merchant from the South Jin Kingdom works for the crown prince. Ning Ke was even more shocked. After thinking for a while, he asked hesitantly, the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom does not like men, right? I'm going to walk the dog first. The third chapter will probably come out later. There seems to be something wrong with the dog's eyes. I may take it to see a doctor tomorrow. I'll report to everyone first. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. With the Grand Secretary's seniority as a senior statesman of 3 dynasties, no matter how strict the laws of the Tang Empire were, it could not stop the riches hidden in his mansion. 30,000 taels of silver was indeed a lot, but it would not frighten the chief steward. However, everyone knew that he was backed by Grand Secretary Wang. A courtier spending 10,000 taels of silver on a section of calligraphy would definitely cause some discussion. Therefore, he wanted to see the merchant from the South Jin Kingdom back off. Who would have thought that the South Jin Kingdom royal merchant would add another 1,000 taels of silver without hesitation? Looking at his calm expression, it seemed that he would not care even if he added tens of thousands of taels of silver. The chief caretaker of the Grand Scholar Manor looked even gloomier. There were some foreign envoys and merchants in the stone house. Most of them were Tangs, the wealthiest kind. They could not help but feel annoyed at the South Jin royal merchant's actions. It was not that they did not have money, but no matter how much they loved Sir Ning's calligraphy, they would feel that the price was too high. The South Jin royal merchant did not seem like he was here to buy the section. Instead, he seemed like he was here to compete with the Tangs, or even to embarrass them. Discussion started in the pavilion. 2 royal merchants from the Tang Empire who lived in the south city of Chang'an prepared to bid. The atmosphere became more heated, or rather, tense. The only person who could remain calm was probably the seller, Zhongli. He had long known that the South Jin royal merchant was in Chang'an, so he had expected such a scene. It could even be said that he had single-handedly caused the conflict between the Tangs and the South Jin Kingdom. Zhongli was the son of the Zhong family in Yangguan. Yangguan was the most prosperous city in the southern border of the Tang Empire. It was very close to the South Jin Kingdom. In fact, it had been the northern capital of the South Jin Kingdom 300 years ago. As such, the people who lived there knew the South Jin Kingdom very well. Even though he had been chased out of the Zhong family a long time ago, he knew everything that had happened in the South Jin Kingdom. He was well aware of the sensitivity and even abnormal self-esteem of the South Jin Kingdom people when they faced the Tangs. Because of something, he was certain that the South Jin royal merchant would not give up on the chicken soup calligraphy no matter what. That was why he dared to say in front of everyone that the chicken soup calligraphy would sell for at least 30,000 taels of silver. Now that it had passed the 30,000 taels of silver, Zhongli could not help but feel proud. As a seller, his greatest honor was to leave his name in the history books along with the goods he sold. As a seller, Zhongli could be calm, happy, and proud. However, as the owner of the stone house, the boss found that the atmosphere was too intense and out of control. He could not be happy no matter what. It was good to earn more commission, but what would he do if he offended two important figures? The boss stood behind a pillar on the first floor. He looked at Zhongli with a gloomy expression and signaled with his eyes. Zhongli understood and began to try to reduce the atmosphere. However, as an imperial merchant of the Tang Empire brazenly joined the battle, his attempt to end the auction suddenly turned into a bubble. Hearing the increasing amount of money, even Zhongli, who had seen more extravagant auctions and bigger scenes, began to feel nervous and even terrified. The bidding had already become a battle between the Tang and the South Jin Kingdom. Although this battle had nothing to do with powerhouses or cavalry, it was only about money. However, it was not something he could control. Zhongli lifted his sleeves to wipe his sweat. He realized that he had underestimated the determination of the people of Chang and to protect their pride. He had also underestimated the influence of the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom on the South Jin royal merchant. The royal merchant of the South Jin Kingdom made another unbelievable offer. Then, he looked at the nobles of the Tang Empire in the pavilion and smiled. The South Jin Kingdom is not as wealthy as the Tang Empire, and I'm just a small merchant. I'm not worthy of your attention. However, the South Jin Kingdom is one of the few big countries, and we still have some silver in our treasury. Hearing this, the pavilion was in an uproar. Although the Tang people present were rich, if the South Jin royal merchant used the South Jin Kingdom's national treasury to bid, who could be his match? Unless the Tang emperor took out the silver from the palace treasury and bid. Just as the merchant had said, although the South Jin Kingdom was not as wealthy as the Tang Empire, how could a royal merchant or a grand secretary compare to the amount of silver in their national treasury? Were they really going to be humiliated by the South Jin royal merchant today? Although they could bid as high as they wanted, what if the South Jin royal merchant suddenly stopped bidding? They could not go back on their word when the time came. The laws of the Tang Empire were not just for show in Chang'an. How can you use the silver in the national treasury to fight with someone? Ning Ke looked at the South Jin royal merchant. He could not understand what was happening. Chu Yuxian said mockingly, how would such a backward country know any rules? Do you think it's like the Tang Empire? In the eyes of the South Jin Emperor and the Crown Prince, the national treasury is their own accounting room. They can use it however they want. At this moment, a subordinate of the Grand Secretary hurried to the steward's side and whispered a few words. The steward, who had been silent for a while, turned to look at the South Jin royal merchant in the West Pavilion. He laughed coldly and said, I was wondering why the South Jin Crown Prince was so interested in the chicken soup calligraphy. So it's because of the hill master of the Great River Kingdom. The South Jin royal merchant did not deny it. He smiled and said, that's right. His Highness knows that the hill master loves the chicken soup calligraphy, so he decided to buy it and give it to you. The chief steward looked at the royal merchant from the South Jin Kingdom and suddenly laughed out loud. He said mockingly, everyone knows that the hill master is infatuated with Mr. Ning Ke of the Tang Empire. That's why she loves the chicken soup calligraphy so much. Does the Crown Prince expect that the chicken soup calligraphy can replace Mr. Ning Ke in the hill master's heart? This is ridiculous and ridiculous to the extreme. The South Jin royal merchant's expression changed. The steward did not wait for him to speak. He continued mockingly, you're trying to use something that belongs to a woman's beloved to make her fall in love with someone else. I really don't know what the Crown Prince is thinking. I didn't expect the South Jin people to be trash on the battlefield. The sword master from the sword garret is trash. You're even so useless in love. The South Jin royal merchant's face darkened at the humiliation. His sleeves trembled and his fists were clenched tightly. However, there was nothing wrong with the steward's words. The South Jin army had never been a match for the Tang cavalry on the battlefield. Lu Qingshan from the sword garret had indeed been killed by Ning Ke at the side door of the academy. The story between the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, and Ning Ke had been spread around the world for many days. The royal merchant suppressed his anger and scolded coldly, "The bidding for the calligraphy is based on strength. Speak if you have money. Don't talk if you don't. Do you think the Tangs only know how to talk?" The moment he said that, the Tangs in the pavilion immediately cursed at him. However, he ignored them and looked at the seller on the stage with a gloomy expression. It seemed like he had made up his mind to use money to pressure the seller. Ning Ke did not expect the South Jin crown prince to buy the chicken soup calligraphy at such a high price just to please Shanshan. After a moment of silence, he took out something from his sleeve and handed it to Chu Yuxian. After saying a few words, he lifted the curtain and walked out of the stone house. Chu Yuxian was stunned for a moment. He gripped the item tightly and walked downstairs to find the owner of the stone house. The owner of the stone house recognized him as old Master Chu's only son and was slightly stunned. He took the seal from Chu Yuxian and glanced at it. His expression changed drastically. This seal was Ning Ke's private seal and rarely appeared on his calligraphy sections. Not many calligraphy appraisers had seen it before. However, the owner had seen it on the back of the chicken soup calligraphy. The owner then realized that Sir Ning had been quietly watching the auction in the pavilion. When he saw Chu Yuxian's private seal, he thought that Sir Ning was expressing his dissatisfaction and anger. He could not help but feel uneasy. Could it be that his judgment of the old brush pen shop's calligraphy sections was wrong? Did the handmaiden really steal it? He heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Chu Yuxian's words. Chu Yuxian gestured for him to bring him to the stage and invited the famous seller to the side. The people in the pavilion noticed the commotion on the stage and gradually stopped their discussions and cursing. The South Jin royal merchant stood by the railing expressionlessly and looked at the stage. He thought that no matter what the Tangs did, the chicken soup calligraphy would definitely be brought back to the South Jin kingdom today. The owner cupped his fists and bowed to the people in the three pavilions. He then cleared his throat and said, "The chicken soup calligraphy is confirmed to be won by Room A2 for 33,000 taels of silver." The pavilion was silent because no one had realized what was going on. Then someone reacted and let out a soft cry of confusion. Room A2 was where the steward of Grand Secretary Wang's residence resided. However, the bidding had not ended. Why did the stone house say that the Grand Secretary Wang's residence had won the chicken soup calligraphy? The South Jin royal merchant's face was livid as he looked downstairs. He questioned coldly, "Even if the bidding ended, I was the one who paid the most. Why did the calligraphy go to someone else? Could it be that all the Tang people do business like this? Don't you care about your reputation?" Chu Yuxian recalled what Ning Ke had said before he left. After making sure that he remembered every word correctly, he looked at him and said mockingly, "So what if you have more money? I won't sell it to you no matter how much money you have. Because Mr. 13 doesn't respect the Crown Prince of South Jin. He actually wrote more than 10,000 words. It seems like energy is really like water in a sponge. There are only a few recommendation votes now. Please squeeze, take a look and vote. Thank you very much. There's another important matter. Taiwanese readers, please be happy. The Jiangye traditional Chinese calligraphy will be sold in bookstores on the 5th of July. I've looked at the cover carefully. I like it very much. There's no problem with it. However, it involves spoilers. Wahahaha, welcome to buy it. The more the better. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 431. Ning Kai was the most inconspicuous in the back of the mountain of the academy, but Mr. 13 was the most famous among the people. His name was spread in the military camp at the frontier fortress, and the people in the streets of Chang and were talking about the slash at the side door of the academy. The people in the stone house might not know Mr. First or Mr. Second, but how could they not know that Mr. 13 was the owner of the old brush pen shop, Sir Ning? After Chu Yuxian said those words on the stage, the pavilion was silent for a moment. Then, there was a sudden burst of cheers and shouts of excitement. The South Jin royal merchant gripped the railing tightly, his face pale with anger. He glared at Chu Yuxian and shouted, "Who are you?" Chu Yuxian held his fan with one hand and placed the other on the back of his hand. He bowed to the crowd and said, "I am Chu Yuxian from Dongcheng, Mr. Ning's representative." Then he looked at the West Pavilion on the third floor and at the ugly expression of the South Jin royal merchant. He smiled and said, "I can sell the chicken soup calligraphy to anyone but you South Jin people. Do you have a problem with that?" The South Jin royal merchant trembled with anger and scolded, "How can you say that?" The owner of the stone house cupped his hands and explained, "Today, the old brush pen shop's 7 calligraphy pieces have special rules. The supplementary rules have been sent to everyone. Everyone should know that Sir Ning has the right to choose his own buyer." The South Jin royal merchant thought of the document he had seen on the table in the pavilion and suppressed his anger. His chest heaved up and down as he said, "Even if Sir Ning has the right to choose his own buyer, he should be the one to do it. How can he let this representative who we don't even know is the real one exercise his right? Did the old brush pen shop know about what happened just now? Was Sir Ning here just now? You Tangs, don't use such shameless methods." The owner was silent for a moment before he smiled and said, "You are right. Sir Ning was here just now, but he has already left." Before he left, he asked Mr. Chu to make the decision. The South Jin royal merchant was stunned. As mentioned earlier, Ning Kai's reputation in Chang'an was too resounding. Especially after he killed Lu Yiqing, his position in the hearts of the Tangs was extremely high. Everyone wanted to see his true face. At this time, the high officials and nobles in the pavilion were originally here for his calligraphy. When they heard that he was in the pavilion earlier, they couldn't help but beat their chests and stamp their feet in regret. Someone shouted, and the sound of footsteps rang out in the pavilion. Dozens of people opened the bamboo curtains and rushed down the wooden building, unable to restrain their curiosity and excitement, towards the outside of the courtyard. The chicken soup calligraphy had already belonged to Grand Secretary Wang's residence. The people present could not drink the chicken soup, so of course they wanted to see what the old hen that made the soup looked like. In the blink of an eye, the stone house was empty. The royal merchant of South Jin Kingdom stood by the railing. His expression was extremely ugly, but he had nothing to say. "Honorable Ning, wait a moment. Mr. 13, wait. My master invites you over." People walked out of the courtyard, passed through the green forest, and came to the shore of Willow Lake. Looking at the boat that was getting further and further away from the quiet lake, they waved their arms and shouted for Ning Kai to come back. The boat leisurely moved on the quiet lake. From afar, they could only see a figure dressed in black walking out of the black canopy. He greeted them with his hands folded in front of his chest, and then went ashore. Looking at the back of the figure disappearing into the alley beside the Victory House, the people by the lake sighed with regret. There was a rumor in Chang'an City that the 7 calligraphy sections being auctioned by the stone house were stolen by the little handmaiden of the old brush pen shop. Ning Kai was present today, so naturally, this rumor was denied in some ways. While the auction of the stone house was going on, the little handmaiden Sang Sang was in a quiet study in the backyard of the Ingo Casino in the western city. She was staring at the pile of papers on the table. Since the night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion 2 years ago, the underworld of Chang and City had been under the control of the Fish Dragon Gang. The study of this casino, which used to belong to a big shot in the western city, had become the Fish Dragon Gang's warehouse. The papers on the table looked a little new, and the handwriting on them was neat. They were not outstanding, and could not be compared to the calligraphy sections in the old brush pen shop. However, the actual value of these papers was actually quite high. These papers were the title deeds of houses and land. Several old stewards of the casino with deep wrinkles were calculating the title deeds of houses and land. Mr. Chi, the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang, stood aside and stared at them worriedly. The beads on the abacus in the hands of the old stewards moved very fast, making a clicking sound in the quiet room. It sounded crisp and pleasant, but it made Mr. Chi more and more worried. The beads on the abacus were still moving fast, and there was still a long time before the calculation was completed. Sang Sang put down the title deed of the newly built three-sectioned house on the lakeside and said, 41,462 taels of silver are still missing. Mr. Chi looked at her with a slightly strange expression, thinking that these stewards were the best accounting experts in the casino, but they had not calculated it yet. Where did she get this number? Sang Sang knew what he was thinking, but she did not explain and waited calmly. After some time, the old stewards of the casino finally finished the complicated calculation. The leading steward carefully cleaned up the title deeds of houses and land on the table, and respectfully reported, according to the letter of intent a few days ago, the total number is still missing is 41,600 taels of silver. This number was a little different from the number Sang Sang had calculated, but not by much. Mr. Chi looked at Sang Sang in surprise, thinking that it was really amazing that she could only make such a small mistake in mental calculation. Sang Sang knew that her calculation was correct, and those old stewards had calculated the tax rate wrong on a title deed. However, thinking that the difference was not big, she did not point it out. Looking at her expression, Mr. Chi made a gesture to let those stewards of the casino leave, and then said seriously, the price of houses and land at the foot of Yanming Mountain is indeed cheaper than other places in Chang and City, but if we buy so many houses at once, some greedy guys will always raise the price. Then he shook his head and said, although the brothers in the gang can lower the price, and the Chang and local government has also talked to someone, we can't go too far. If someone reported this to the imperial court, it would be hard for me to explain to second brother Chow when he comes back. So this is probably the final price. It turned out that the title deeds of houses and land on the table were the deeds of the houses by the Yanming Lake. The Yanming Lake had recently been dredged by the Ministry of Works of the Imperial Court, and the accumulated lake mud was still piled up near the sand and stone mountains. It was said that it would not be better until next summer. Because of this, although the scenery of the Yanming Lake at the foot of Yanming Mountain was beautiful, it was still not a good place for people in Chang and who paid attention to the quality of life. The land and housing prices by the Yanming Lake were the cheapest in Chang and City. Nowadays, most of the houses by the lake were dilapidated old houses, and the occasional new houses were built by ordinary people who were greedy for cheap. Hearing Mr. Chi's words, Sang Sang nodded and said, "Young master has already predicted that the price will be raised." These days, Mr. Chi had been secretly buying the title deeds of houses and land by the Yanming Lake at Ning Kei's request. As the leader of the biggest gang in Chang and City, he naturally had countless subordinates to do this for him. But at this time, he still did not understand why Ning Kei wanted to buy these properties. It's good to stroll by the Yanming Lake occasionally. It's not suitable to live there. He frowned and said, even if you want to live there, you don't have to buy all the houses by the lake. No matter how low the price is, it's still a huge sum. Because this was the will of the great Tang Emperor, as well as the order of General Xiaofan. Xiaofan looked at the fertile grassland under his feet and the grass roots that had been stepped into the soil by his boots. He slowly moved the soles of his boots, and with a soft sizzling sound, something that looked like oil squeezed out from the side of his boots. In addition to the rotten black soil, there was also a lot of rotten blood. Since the start of the war, the cavalry under his command had yet to face the warriors of the Desolate Man tribe. They had not even seen a single Desolate Man. However, he was not as curious and excited as his subordinates to fight with them, because he was a Desolate Man himself. Looking at the black bloodstains left on the grassland, Xiaofan imagined the last battle a few days ago. He imagined the scene of his clansmen, whom he had not seen for a long time, falling under arrows or flying swords. His indifferent face was expressionless, but his eyebrows slightly twitched. The cavalry of the Tang Empire did not go to the front of the battlefield. This was His Majesty's order, as well as his own thoughts. His Majesty knew of his background, but still let him personally command the war. This meant that he agreed with his thoughts. Xiaofan was very grateful for His Majesty's trust. A clear whistle came from afar. He looked up expressionlessly and saw a grassland girl riding a horse and herding hundreds of sheep a few hundred feet below the meadow. Not long after the war, the people on the grassland started herding again. From this point of view, life was always peaceful and simple. The war was just an interlude. Looking at the grassland girl with rosy cheeks and bright eyes, Xiaofan remembered the scene when he escaped from the front gate many years ago and met his sister again in Hebei County. Then he confirmed that his gratitude to His Majesty had nothing to do with the trust and tolerance he had shown over the years. He was just grateful that His Majesty treated his sister well. Mr. Ku destroyed the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine with a single sword. Xiaofan went south to the Tang Empire and served in the army for decades. In the end, he became the top general of the Tang Empire. Then he became a distinguished visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. But no one knew that he was a remnant of the Devil's Doctrine and a descendant of the Desolate Man. General Xiaofan seemed to be ruthless and powerful, but in reality, the few important figures in the world who knew his true identity had always tried to use his past identity to threaten and control him. His true identity was like countless spider webs, trapping him in the center of the web. No matter how he struggled, he could not break free. He could only gradually fall silent and then gradually suffocate. The Emperor of the Tang Empire and the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace knew where he came from. Both of them were like two indestructible stone walls that had been slowly closing in on each other over the years. Sandwiched between the stone walls, he found it hard to breathe. No matter which side he leaned towards, he would die. He once thought of leaning on both sides of the stone walls. He wanted to be loyal to the Tang Empire and serve the West Hill at the same time. In the past few years, he had indeed done so. But two loyalties could not get along. So in the end, he could only be loyal to himself. He maintained his strength with violence and coldness, and did not lean against the stone walls. Regrettably, there was a limit to a person's strength. He was still very strong now, but he would grow old, get sick, and become weak. However, those two stone walls would never become weak. Moreover, he had killed many people, and those people wanted to kill him very much. So Xiaofan wanted to make himself strong forever. He went to the north of the Hulun Sea and wanted to seize the tomes of Arcane. But in the end, he lost all hope in front of the scholar. When he was truly in despair, he suddenly had a new hope. In front of him at the end of his rope, there was suddenly a glimmer of hope. That scholar made Xiaofan give up on the idea of being powerful forever, of being insufferably arrogant forever. But he also discovered the possibility of returning safely and not caring about the affairs of the world. Summer is coming. Everything is coming to an end. Xiaofan looked at the grassland in the spring breeze and thought of the coming midsummer. A rare gentle expression gradually appeared on his cold face. His sister was the Empress of the Tang Empire. His sister's name was Summer. The gentle spring breeze blew on the general's gentle face. There was a strong smell of blood in the wind, and then there was a sound of weeding. Not far behind Xiao, more than 100 grassland cavalrymen and Yen soldiers knelt on the ground. Under the bright knife light, their heads were separated from their bodies, and blood flowed into the sea of grass. These grassland cavalrymen and Yen soldiers were arrested for rebellion and violation of rules. They were all killed without a trial, just because of General Xiao's words. On the battlefield, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire was responsible for maintaining military discipline and suppressing rebellions. But today's execution without a trial had seriously violated the rules of the Divine Hall and the law of the Tang Empire. But the law of the Tang Empire could not control the general. So Xiao killed people like grass. His expression did not change. An officer rode a warhorse and galloped from the direction of the military camp. Xiao took the letter handed by the officer. Although he was stationed in Tuyang City all year round and was far away in the wilderness, he was after all the defender general of the Tang Empire. He had many spies in Chang'an City and the imperial court. He did not have many personal relationships with defender general of the state Su Shi, but they respected each other. So some things in the military ministry would be passed directly to the military camp through those spies. The letter described what had happened in Chang'an City recently. Xiao knew about the two conversations between Su Shi and Ning Quebec. He also knew about the death of Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu on the rainy street. So he read the letter in silence for a long time. Last year in Tuyang City, he had reached an agreement with the academy. So he did not want to care about the academy's entry into the human realm and would not be as vigilant as Su Shi. However, the death of Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu made him vigilant. Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu were the prince's men, and also his men. And they were both involved in that incident. Xiao did not understand why Ning Ke was against him. First he killed Lin Ling in the wilderness, then he killed Gu Shi in Tuyang City, and now he killed Huang Xing and Yu Shuizhu. All the people close to him had died one by one under his knife. The imperial court and the academy had agreed to his retirement, but it seemed that this person had a different opinion. Is there really a fish that escaped the net? Xiao frowned slightly and shook his head after thinking for a moment. He knew very well that Lin Guangyuan's son was dead. Because he had personally examined the body of the white and clean little boy. Then he remembered a saying in Chang'an City. The academy's Ning Ke and Princess Li Yu were close. Was it because of the dragon throne? Xiao's expression grew colder and colder. He had already decided to retire, but if someone tried to harm his sister, harm his nephew, or steal the throne that belonged to his nephew, then he would kill the other party at all costs. The executions continued. The heads of the soldiers who violated the rules were cut off and fell on the grassland. The sound of bones scraping could be heard continuously. In the smell of blood, Xiao thought about what happened in Chang'an and gradually became murderous. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in the blue sky above the grassland. The man jumped down from the sky, whistling through the air, and rushed toward Xiao with an incomparably domineering murderous intent. Xiao looked up. In addition to the figure in the sky, there was also the blazing sun. So he narrowed his eyes. He was already very familiar with this scene. He had seen it on the northern shore of the Hulun Sea. These days, he had seen it several times. So he did not panic, and his expression was still calm and indifferent. An extremely fierce aura gushed out from his body. His leather boots stepped deeply into the soft grassland soil. The next moment, the soft soil instantly became extremely hard. With the soles of his boots as the center, countless traces like a spider web appeared on the grassland. Chapter 433. The two silhouettes met in the air, like the legendary floating mountains in the depths of the western wilderness colliding with each other. The terrifying sound of the collision reverberated in all directions. The sharp blood-red broadsword stirred up countless whistling sounds in the air, as if the blue sky was about to be split open. However, most of the momentum of the broadsword was blocked by a pair of iron fists. Occasionally, the broadsword broke through Xiaoho's iron fists and fell on his body. Xiaoho's battle robe would emit a pale yellow luster, preventing the sharp broadsword from biting into his body. The blood-red broadsword was the most powerful weapon of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Although it could not break into Xiaoho's body, its weight and the impact made it a horrible iron hammer, hitting Xiaoho's body heavily. Xiaoho's iron fists were iron hammers, mercilessly hitting Tang's chest and abdomen. In the blink of an eye, the two powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine hit each other countless times in the air. They hit each other countless times. They hit each other countless times. They hit each other countless times. The two floating hills kept hitting each other, separating, and then colliding again. The sound of the collision, like muffled thunder, kept ringing in the sky not far from the grassland. The continuous rumbling of thunder was so close that the sheep lying in the sea of grass, their bodies stiff, instinctively felt the terror of death. Terrified, they propped up their limp legs and fled in all directions. The grassland girl, who fell from the horse, lay in the grass and looked at the two godlike figures in the sky. She was so shocked and scared that she turned into a fool. She couldn't care less about her flock of sheep. The soldiers of the Tang army, who were enforcing the military law, covered their ears and knelt on the grass with pale faces. 3 soldiers who were lucky enough not to be beheaded could not cover their ears because their hands were tied. Black blood gradually flowed out of the corners of their eyes and noses. A moment later, they were shocked to death by the collision of the two powerhouses in the air. The horses on the meadow neighed in panic. The heaviest muffled thunder sounded in the sky above the grassland. The fierce wind swept the earth from the sky, breaking the long grass and flying everywhere. The two figures in the air finally separated, retreated hundreds of feet, and fell on the grassland. 2 muffled sounds almost at the same time sounded on the grassland. Xiaoho and Tang's domineering aura leaked out a little as their feet landed on the ground. The grassland under their boots suddenly collapsed and turned into 2 pits. The spring grass in the pits turned into broken pieces, like newly built tombs that had not been sealed. Enemy attack. Assassins. Even though they were facing peerless powerhouses like the World Wayfarer of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the well-trained border army of the Tang army woke up with a strong will and began to organize a defense line. The sound of horses' hooves and armors collided incessantly. In the military camp at the bottom of the meadow, hundreds of heavily armored black cavalry of the Tang Empire assembled at an unimaginable speed. They formed 2 vanguard formations and galloped out of the camp, leaving grass and dust in their wake as they launched a surprise attack and sealed off the meadow. Then, there was the sound of wheels rolling. More than 10 heavy-duty crossbows were pushed out of the camp and aimed at the man on the meadow. Array masters, under the protection of powerful attendants, began to set up temporary arrays. The Tang cavalrymen stared at the man on the meadow with grim expressions. The enemy was only one person. The Tang army was fully prepared, but they still sensed an unprecedented danger. The atmosphere on the meadow became extremely tense. Tang stood in the meadow, stood in the slightly sunken pits, stood in front of hundreds of the most elite Tang cavalry in the world, stood in front of countless crossbow bolts. His expression was still calm, still silent, as if he had seen nothing. He only had eyes for Xiaoho, who was not far away. Dun was still wearing the ordinary leather jacket, but compared to the past, his leather jacket looked more shabby, and many parts of it had even rotted. His expression was calm, but his face was somewhat haggard. He had helped the Senior Statesman Society lead the tribe to fight against the Central Plains Allied forces for many days. Recently, he had continuously attacked Xiahou and fought with the Tang army several times. Even if he was an Iron Man, he would still feel tired. Especially in the previous battle with Xiahou. Although it was a short battle, he had suffered serious injuries. Countless holes had appeared on the leather jacket between his chest and abdomen, and the color of blood could be vaguely seen. The blood-red saber in his hand was also somewhat dim. The Tang army was undoubtedly the most powerful army in the world. In the past years, under the command of General Xiahou, they had conquered the Yan kingdom in the east and attacked the wilderness in the north. They had won every battle and conquered everything. They were extremely proud and confident. However, in front of this person, they could not be proud. The Tang army was not afraid of cultivators, because they thought that no matter how powerful a cultivator was, he was no different from an ordinary person in front of the black armored cavalry and crossbow bolts. But they had never seen a cultivator as powerful as Tang. The commander of the Tang cavalry stared at the man in the leather jacket in the distance and said coldly, "If we can't kill this monster today, how can we still call ourselves the Tang cavalry?" The hundreds of Tang cavalrymen on the meadow heard this and their expressions suddenly became solemn. They pulled out their padeos from their sheaths and collectively shouted, "Yes, sir." Hundreds of padeos were pulled out from their sheaths at the same time. The sound of the padeos being pulled together became very solemn and even tragic. In the days after the war between the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Desolate Man, the man in the leather jacket on the meadow appeared around the Tang army 7 times. The Tang cavalrymen had surrounded him 7 times, but none of them had succeeded. Instead, this man had killed many of them. He had even succeeded in advancing 3 times, until he was in front of General Xiahou. If the general was not powerful and invincible, he would have been killed by the man. Ordinary people were not as powerful as cultivators, and ordinary cavalrymen were not as powerful as cultivators. The Tang soldiers could accept this, but they could not accept that they could not even stop the man. They could not accept that as subordinates, they had to rely on the general to maintain the safety of the camp. For the proud Tang cavalrymen, this was the greatest humiliation. The bleak whistling of the military flute sounded around the meadow. Nearly 800 Tang cavalrymen in heavy armor began to slowly form a formation. The array master with crossbows in the camp also pushed forward dozens of feet. A battle between the world's strongest cavalrymen and the world's strongest cultivators was about to begin. After betraying the front gate, you really became a coward. You only know how to hide in the camp and always let your men die. Tang looked at Xiahou and said. Xiahou put his fist to his lips and coughed twice. He stretched out his hand to stop the actions of his subordinates around the meadow. Then he looked up at Tang and said, "My troops did not participate in the war against the tribe. You know very well why. So I don't understand why you have been trying to kill me since last year, even risking your life to kill me." Tang took off his felt hat and threw it at his feet. Then he slowly walked out of the collapsed sea of grass and stopped about 10 feet away from Xiahou. He said, "Because there are many people in the front gate waiting for you to go back." Xiahou frowned slightly. His eyebrows, which seemed like they were carved out of iron wire, looked cold and hard once he frowned. There was no one alive in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. There were only white skeletons and dead people on the ground. Then the people waiting for him to go back were not people, but those unwilling ghosts. Before the front gate was broken by Mr. Ku, your teacher, and I had already left. This has nothing to do with me. You can't blame me for this. But after you went south, you still became a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. Tang said, "A traitor is a traitor." She said worriedly, "Assassinating the general of the empire. Even the academy will not allow you to do this." Ning Ke said, when did I say that I would assassinate him? Sang Sang asked, why don't we expose the relationship between Xiahou and the devil's doctrine? I promised eldest brother that I wouldn't tell anyone about Xiahou's identity. After a short pause, Ning Ke said, including his relationship with the Empress. Sang Sang asked in confusion, but you told me. Ning Ke said, you are not someone else. Sang Sang nodded and said, that's true. After a moment, she thought of the calligraphy auction at the stone house and said, you can't even solve Xiahou's problem. Why do you have to offend the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom? Ning Ke didn't know how to explain it to Sang Sang. He couldn't possibly say it in front of her. At that time, when he heard that the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom wanted to buy the chicken soup calligraphy to please the calligraphy addict, he felt angry for no reason. What were cultivators to us in the past? He changed the topic cleverly. Sang Sang thought of the conversation she had with Ning Ke in the city of Wei as a child. She thought of the burned record of the Tao and said, back then, cultivators were immortals in our eyes. Ning Ke said, then I am immortal now. We are immortals. Sang Sang laughed happily. Ning Ke said with a smile, I'm not even afraid of the crown prince of the Tang Empire. Why would I be afraid of the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom? Sang Sang reminded him, the Tang Empire doesn't have a crown prince. Ning Ke's smile faded and he sighed, this is another troublesome matter. At the back of the mountain of the academy, by the stream behind the blacksmith's house, under the big water cart. Ning Ke, fourth brother and sixth brother squatted by the stream and stared blankly. After an unknown period of time, sixth brother raised the black iron object in his hand to the sunlight. Ning Ke and fourth brother's eyes followed his movement. It was an iron object that looked like a small wine pot. There were many lines carved on it. Those lines were deep into the money and most of them were straight. They couldn't see any deeper meaning. Sixth brother touched the lines on the small iron pot with his thick fingers and said, it's uniform enough. For a master blacksmith like sixth brother, the difference that couldn't be seen by the naked eye couldn't escape the touch of his fingers. If his fingers judged that the lines were uniform, then they must be uniform. These lines cut the area of the iron pot into 64 pieces. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough. Especially the depth of the lines and the bearing capacity of the curved surface, it can ensure the uniformity when it breaks. Fourth brother picked up a branch from the side, pointed to the small iron pot and said, Junior brother's idea sounds very reasonable, but I tried it with gunpowder last night and it didn't work. I don't know if we should deepen the engraved lines a little bit, maybe in this way we can guarantee that it will break. Sixth brother shook his head and said, if the lines are deeper, the internal stress of the iron pot will be destroyed and the structure will disperse. Once it breaks, it will just be a firecracker. Ning Ke hesitated for a moment and asked, how about we try it with the real thing? Really? Maybe it will work. I think so. Sixth brother looked at fourth brother. Fourth senior brother nodded. There was a spiral mouth at the top of the small iron pot, which was a perfect art carefully carved by sixth brother. Ning Ke unscrewed the iron pot stopper and said, even if it doesn't work, we can sell it as a wine pot. Sixth senior fellow apprentice smiled honestly. Ning Ke took out a yellowish fire talisman and stuffed it into the iron pot. Then he tightened the stopper. How? Sixth brother asked nervously. Fourth brother pointed to the clear stream in front of him and said, throw it in. Ning Ke was a little nervous. Hearing this, he threw the small iron pot into the stream. Wait a minute. Sixth brother ran back to the iron-making room and carried 2 huge fine iron plates. He erected them by the stream and put them in front of the 3 people. Fourth brother said unhappily, even if it succeeds, how powerful can it be? Why are you so nervous? Sixth brother said seriously, when youngest brother was developing the talisman arrow, fourth brother thought of the pavilion in the mirror lake that was half collapsed. His expression changed slightly and he stood behind the fine iron plates. Seeing that everyone was ready, Ning Ke closed his eyes and his psyche power slowly seeped out from his sense of perception. It passed through the iron plates in front of him, through the clear stream and into the small iron pot at the bottom of the stream. Then it fell on the talisman paper. As the psyche power entered the small iron pot, there was also a pure great spirit. The fire talisman in the small iron pot at the bottom of the stream suddenly burned violently. But it was confined in a very small space. After a moment, a deafening explosion resounded in the stream. Boom! Accompanied by a shrill roar, countless iron pieces shot out. Tock, 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 tock. The sound gradually subsided. After a long time, the three academy brothers behind the fine iron plates cautiously poked their heads out. Their academy uniforms had been completely soaked by the stream. Looking at the fragments of the small iron pot that were deeply embedded in the iron plate, thinking that if they didn't have this layer of protection, these iron fragments would have shot through their bodies like arrows. Chapter 435. The bank of the stream was not blown up, but many fish in the stream were killed. They turned their white bellies and floated on the muddy water. Sixth brother stared at the stream and suddenly said, "This is better than the primordial 13 arrows. Any talisman master can use it, but the manufacturing process is a little more particular. It is difficult for the craftsmen in the Ministry of Works to make it. Moreover, most talisman masters are weak, so it is difficult for them to get close to the city wall on the battlefield. These small iron kettles that can explode are used to attack the city, and they are always successful. If, as you said, there are more talisman masters, and they are all as strong as youngest brother, the Tang army will definitely sweep the world without any scruples." Fourth senior brother murmured. The paleness on his face gradually faded away. His usually calm eyes were still filled with shock, as well as some other extremely complicated emotions. Master Yen Sei really has a unique vision. I always thought that although my junior brother's aptitude in talisman Taoism was excellent, it was not as good as the calligraphy addict. Thinking of the talisman arrow last year, I realized that what Master Yen Sei valued most was the fantastic ideas in your mind that were completely not limited by the rules. He suddenly made a deep bow to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke was startled and hurriedly avoided. Fourth brother straightened up, looked at his eyes and said very seriously, "Talisman masters in the eyes of the world are powerful, but they are often restrained in the battle. Today, youngest brother, your wonderful ideas let talisman masters have offensive weapons. I thank you on behalf of all the talisman masters in the world. Don't tell others about this for the time being. It must be kept secret." Fourth brother murmured, "I have to ask the teacher first. It is too dangerous, too dangerous." There were countless dead fish by the stream, and the water wheel was broken. Ning Ke walked to the iron plate and tried to dig out the fragments of the small iron kettle deeply embedded in the iron plate. However, he found that he could not dig them out with his own strength. He could not help but say, "This is not scientific." According to his design and calculation, the fire talisman burned in the small iron kettle. Because there was too little air in the iron kettle, even if it could successfully explode, it should be far less powerful than the experimental results. So he thought it was not scientific. Suddenly, he remembered that when he activated the talisman paper, he had sent some great spirit into the small iron kettle. In essence, the Great Spirit was the absolutely pure qi of heaven and earth. When the talisman made by a talisman master was not very powerful, if the talisman paper was provided with sufficient pure qi of heaven and earth, the power of the talisman could be greatly enhanced. This was the method that he had thought of when he accepted the challenge from monk Guanhai of the Lank Temple and meditated for half a day by the Yanming Lake. Previously, he had poured some great spirit into the small iron kettle, which was equivalent to pouring liquid oxygen into the small iron kettle. The liquid oxygen helped the fire talisman burn fiercely, which made the power of the explosion much greater. Apart from himself, could other talisman masters do this? Ning Ke stood by the stream, frowning and thinking hard. He thought that if he really wanted to use this method on the battlefield, the talisman master needed to have a strong enough control over the chi of heaven and earth. In other words, this method had a high requirement for the talisman master's state. There were very few talisman masters in the world, and there were even fewer talisman masters who could enter the upper see-through state. It seemed that it was still wishful thinking to rely on the small iron kettle to change the pattern of the war in the world. However, it could at least change the situation of the battle. The loud noise by the stream startled the people in the back of the mountain of the academy. However, the first to arrive at the stream was not a person, but the proud big white goose. The big white goose looked at the murky stream water and the dead fish floating on the surface. Perhaps it was sad that its pet had been killed. It straightened its neck and squawked at the three people on the other side of the river. It seemed especially angry. Fourth brother and sixth brother walked directly behind Ning Ke and kept silent. Ning Ke thought bitterly, was this the meaning of the dead younger brother but not the dead senior brother? He did not want to fight with this guy by the stream. This guy looked very strong, and even if he won, there would be no glory. He hurriedly comforted, "Don't be angry, don't be angry. Tomorrow I will buy 2 baskets of fish and pour them into the stream to play with you. Wooden fish, don't be angry, this is a sacrifice that must be made for the progress of science." The big white goose second brother raised was called wooden fish. The brothers in the back of the mountain of the academy did not know why second brother gave the big white goose such a name. No one in the academy cultivated Buddhism. According to seventh sister's private analysis, it was probably because second brother habitually used the stick on his head to discipline the big white goose, just like knocking on wooden fish. That was why the big white goose was named wooden fish. Seventh sister could discuss and guess at will, but the other brothers did not dare to ask second brother for confirmation. After all, the proud big white goose had never shown the sacred beast of the Buddhism sect. It would not resist when people knocked on its head, and it would accept it submissively. Seventh sister's eyes were getting brighter and brighter. She had long been attracted by the drawing and did not look at him. She said, "Of course, setting up an array is more interesting than embroidery." Ning Ke nervously rubbed his hands and said, "Can it be done in 100 days? Seventh sister said, "What kind of tactical array do you want to set up? To kill people or to guard against people?" Ning Ke said, "Is there a kind of tactical array that can transmit my psyche power to every corner of the lake?" Seventh sister waved her hand and said, "That is easy. 10 days will do. See you tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 436. Ning Ke did not see Chen Pipi and Tang Xiaotang at the back of the mountain of the academy. He could not help but feel curious. When he left the back of the mountain and passed by the old library, he went upstairs to read some books. He saw third sister Yu Lian by the east window and bowed to her. Unexpectedly, she did not know where Tang Xiaotang was. Was Chen Pipi really in love with Tang Xiaotang? He smiled as he thought about it. Then his expression became a little solemn. Some things belong to everyone. It's meaningless to worry about them. Yu Lian put down the pen in her hand and looked up at him. She said, "For example, your business will always be your business, and you can only handle it yourself." It was already the deepest part of late spring. The east window was sheltered from the blazing sun. The wind filtered through the green trees outside the window was not dry yet. But in the forest by the wetland, cicadas were already singing. Ning Ke understood the meaning of senior sister's words. Looking at her innocent cheeks and mature and quiet eyes, he suddenly felt that he seemed to have forgotten something very important, which was related to senior sister. The summer wind finally spread from the sea to the depths of the continent. The West Hill Divine Kingdom was located in the southwest of the Tang Empire. It was closer to the sea, so summer came earlier here. The abundant rain and warm air stimulated the plants on Peach Mountain to grow excitedly. Countless green plants grew on the beautiful white jade cliffs. The greenery covered the whole mountain, arching around the numerous Taoist temples on the broken cliffs, adding a touch of beauty to the solemnity of this place. There was a stone house in a remote corner of the third cliff. Compared to the luxuriant surroundings, the stone house looked extremely monotonous and even a little withered. There were few people around. The stone house was not completely enclosed. On the side facing the cliff plateau, there were dozens of air holes. Light shone in through those air holes. Although they were not like windows, they could at least bring some light. There was a desk under the air holes. Yi Hongyu sat by the desk and looked at the paper on the desk quietly. She looked very focused, as if all her attention was attracted by the paper and nothing else. It was a letter from the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom. There was a sword made with clumsy techniques and lines on the paper. She had been sitting in the stone house and reading the sword on the paper for a few days. Her food and drink were all sent by the servants of the judicial department. She did not know that the cliffs outside the stone house had already turned red and green. She did not know that the seasons had changed from spring to summer, and she did not care about the change of attitude of the people in the divine hall towards her. One night in summer, someone came to the stone house. Now Yi Hongyu's cultivation state had already fallen to the lower see-through state and might even fall into the no-doubt state. She was no longer the Tao addict from before. Why would he be afraid? Looking at the paper sword stabbing towards his eyebrows, Chen Bachi was shocked and slightly angry. A mocking smile immediately appeared on his face. In his eyes, the paper sword that was about the length of a finger was extremely ridiculous. He thought to himself, she would rather die than bow her head? Then she could only wait to be humiliated. However, the next moment, the mocking smile on his face suddenly froze. Because he clearly felt a vast and boundless aura gushing out from the thin paper sword and instantly enveloped his body. It was a mighty sword style. Chen Bachi seemed to see endless yellow water rushing towards him. He seemed to see the surging river at the junction of the South Jin Kingdom and the Great River Kingdom leaving the ground and slapping towards his eyes. He was terrified and his Taoist heart suddenly became wet and cold. Only then did he understand that the paper sword was not ridiculous. It was him who was ridiculous. His pupils suddenly contracted and he wanted to save himself. However, the sword style on the thin paper had already descended between his eyebrows. Puff, puff. There were two very slight puffs. Two extremely thin blood lines appeared on Chen Bachi's eyes. Two lines of blood were drawn across his black pupils and the whites of his eyes. After a moment, the two lines of blood rose up and down. Blood and the juice in his eyeballs flowed out. Pain and darkness occupied Chen Bachi's consciousness. Ah! What? What sword is this? He covered his eyes and fell to the ground. He kept rolling in pain and let out a desperate howl like a dying beast. Yi Hongyu stood up and untied the slanted front of her green Taoist robe. She undid the belt of her underwear and put the paper sword between her fingers against her soft skin. Feeling the paper sword against her delicate skin, she became extremely calm. Looking at Chen Bachi who was rolling under her feet, she said softly, "I know you like to see my body. My clothes are unbuttoned now," she said. Chen Bachi covered his face and howled in pain. Blood and gelatin-like liquid seeped through his fingers. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly, "It's a pity that you can't see it anymore." Late that night in early summer, Chen Bachi, the former commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, was attacked and blinded. The once proud Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, who was later forgotten, ignored, humiliated and hurt, left Peach Mountain under the cover of the night. No one knew where she went after that. A few days later, the Divine Hall delegation that went to Chang and city of the Tang Empire returned to West Hill. According to normal calculations, the West Hill delegation should have returned a few days earlier. However, for some reason, the delegation took a detour to the South Jin Kingdom and was delayed. The carriage slowly drove on the steep but not dangerous stone path of the West Hill Divine Palace. The deacons and officials in the delegation all noticed that the atmosphere in the Divine Hall was a little strange today. Wherever the luxurious black carriage with gold embroidery passed, the people in the Divine Hall would retreat and then respectfully kneel by the side of the road to salute. However, there was something else in their expressions other than awe. Cheng Lixue, the priest of the Revelation Department, lifted the curtains and looked at the people kneeling under the green trees to welcome the great divine priest. He could not help but frown when he saw the uneasy expressions on their faces. Did something really happen? He muttered to himself and then turned to look at the great divine priest of Revelation who was resting in the carriage. He respectfully asked, "I'll go and have a look." The great divine priest of Revelation was silent. The carriage of the delegation traveled between the cliffs and the temple. There was still a cliff's distance from the Divine Hall of Revelation. Cheng Lixue walked out of the carriage and looked at the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall who were gathering in front of him. His face became a little gloomy. Cheng Lixue walked in front of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. The cavalrymen of the Divine Hall all saluted, but because they were already wearing armor, no one got off their horses. He looked at Chen Bachi whose eyes were wrapped in bandages and noticed that the former cavalry commander's face was extremely gloomy. He could not help but frown and ask, "What happened?" Chen Bachi gritted his teeth and said, "Yi Hongyu betrayed the judicial department and the Divine Hall. I was ordered by Commander Luo to gather the cavalrymen and prepare to hunt her down in the world." Yi Hongyu betrayed the Divine Hall? Cheng Lixue frowned slightly. His snow-like hair became even colder. Ever since the great divine priest of Revelation predicted that something big would happen to the judicial department, he had been very worried. The delegation specially went to the sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom for this matter. However, he did not expect that it would still happen. He looked at Chen Bachi and said in a low voice, "I remember that your position as the cavalry commander was taken away from you in the wilderness last year. When was it restored?" "Just the day before yesterday. Luo Kadi is the commander of the Divine Guards. When can he intervene in the affairs of the judicial department?" Cheng Lixue looked at Chen Bachi expressionlessly and said, "You are just a subordinate of the judicial department. How dare you be rude to the Grand Master Yi Hongyu? Isn't that disrespecting your superior?" In the Divine Hall, as an official of the judicial department, Chen Bachi was not afraid of the priest of the Revelation Department. Moreover, he was blinded by Yi Hongyu's paper sword. He was only thinking about revenge and how to capture Yi Hongyu back to the West Hill to torture and humiliate her. How could he care about Cheng Lixue's attitude? He said coldly, "This is also the order of the great divine priest of judgment." Cheng Lixue was silent. If this was really the order of the great divine priest of judgment, then he could not oppose it. At this moment, the luxurious carriage slowly drove over. An old voice came from the carriage. "The judicial department does not represent the Divine Hall. I'm back. There's one more chapter today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 437. The great divine priest of Revelation was in the carriage. The proud cavalrymen of Divine Hall could no longer sit on their horses. There was no such thing as not wearing armor in front of the great divine priest. They hurriedly dismounted and knelt in front of the carriage. Shenbachi's expression became extremely ugly. With the help of his attendants, he slowly knelt down. Yi Hongyu left the judicial department, but it doesn't mean that she betrayed the Divine Hall. Because leaving is not betrayal. There was a sigh in the carriage. Cheng Lixue felt the great divine priest of Revelation's disappointment and sadness, so he also became angry and sad. His snow-like hair fluttered faster and faster. He looked at Shenbachi, who was kneeling in front of the carriage, expressionlessly and said coldly, "Go and accept your punishment." Shenbachi suddenly raised his head and looked at Cheng Lixue. If his eyes were not wrapped in bandages, he would have been able to see the resentment in his eyes. Last year in the Palace of the Wilderness, it was Cheng Lixue who made him suffer the painful punishment of thorns. Now he was blind. It was Yi Hongyu who had betrayed the Divine Hall. Why should he accept the punishment? The mountain breeze of early summer blew by the palace on the cliff and lifted the curtain of the carriage, revealing an old hand. The hand landed on the window lattice and was slowly knocking. It was the hand of the great divine priest of Revelation. The cavalrymen and deacons of Divine Hall lowered their heads and did not dare to look at the hand. Shenbachi could not see it, so he still looked over there with a resentful expression. The old hand slowly knocked on the window. A faint aura shrouded the scene. When the people beside the carriage heard the light knocking sound, a strange and terrifying feeling welled up in their hearts. Someone saw Shenbachi's face and almost fell to the ground in horror. Shenbachi didn't feel or see anything. So he still looked resentful and even tried to defend himself. However, he opened his mouth but could not speak. He reached out to touch his mouth and found that his fingers touched something slightly wet and sticky. Then he felt something sweet in his mouth. Only then did he realize what had happened. The resentful expression on his face suddenly turned into incomparable horror and despair. His tongue was gone. There was only blood and minced meat in his mouth. Seeing Shenbachi's mouth dripping with pus and blood, the crowd was terrified. Someone could not help but exclaim. Several cavalrymen of Divine Hall subconsciously wanted to step forward, but suddenly realized that this must be the punishment of the great divine priest in the carriage. They trembled and stopped. The voice of the great divine priest of Revelation rang in the carriage again. "You shouldn't have spoken. Can't talk. But you have to pass the message on behalf of someone else. Then don't talk anymore." After dealing with the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, the luxurious carriage continued to move towards the four magnificent Divine Halls at the top of Peach Mountain without any delay. In the dark carriage, the great divine priest of Revelation quietly looked at the early summer scenery of Peach Mountain. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "I don't want to and shouldn't care about the affairs of the judicial department. But now it seems that I have to care. So I have to." Cheng Lixue was silent. Looking at the old and tired face of the great divine priest of Revelation, he suddenly had a strong dislike for the bigwig on the seat of heavenly black jade. The carriages of the diplomatic corps had already dispersed. Only the black gold carriage of the great divine priest of Revelation was left. It slowly drove to the highest point of the Divine Hall and came to the solemn black Divine Hall. The carriage seemed extremely small and lonely in front of the huge and magnificent Divine Hall. However, everyone who saw the carriage, no matter which deacon of the Divine Hall they were from, was shocked and awed. They were awed by the great divine priest of Revelation in the carriage. They were shocked that the great divine priest of Revelation actually appeared in front of the Divine Hall of Judgment. For countless years, the three most honorable great divine priests in the West Hill Divine Palace would never enter other divine halls because of their respect for each other and their own pride. People knelt before the stone steps of the divine hall, beside the stone pillars, and by the road. They looked at the carriage anxiously, not knowing what had happened today. They saw the old great divine priest of revelation slowly walk out of the carriage, up the stone steps, and into the black divine hall of judgment. Many people exclaimed in their hearts. The great divine priest of revelation was very old and very thin. However, when he walked into the divine hall of judgment, he seemed very tall, as if he was about to touch the top of the divine hall of judgment. He walked on the flat stone ground, and all the people of the judicial department knelt down to greet him. No matter what the arrival of the great divine priest of revelation meant to the judicial department, no one except the great divine priest of judgment was qualified to express their emotions. The great divine priest of revelation walked into the divine hall of judgment and stood in front of the empty and monotonous hall. Looking at the bead curtain in the distance, he stopped and did not move forward. He came to talk to someone, so he wanted to walk into the divine hall of judgment. However, if he continued to walk into the divine hall, the bad-tempered guy behind the bead curtain would definitely think that he was looking for a fight. The great divine priest of West Hill was also a human being, and a human being must have emotions. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the figure on the seat of heavenly black jade in the distance and said, "I went to the South Jin kingdom and brought back someone's ashes." The bead curtain in the depths of the divine hall moved without any wind, vaguely revealing the seat of heavenly black jade. The great divine priest of judgment held his chin in his hand and looked down without saying anything. The great divine priest of revelation shook his head and said, "You shouldn't do these things." The great divine priest of judgment still did not look up and said indifferently, "So what? Under Haotian and above the seat of heavenly God, do I still need to lower my head to Lu Bai?" After a long silence, the great divine priest of revelation said, "Before Senior Brother of Light left, you did not need to lower your head. But after he left, you could only sit on the seat of heavenly black jade. Your head was originally lowered." The great divine priest of light's escape from the secluded pavilion caused a great shock in the West Hill Divine Palace. Few people knew that this old man, who was known as the strongest divine priest of light in hundreds of years, had pushed down the confinement built by the great divine priest of judgment with his natal divine power. But almost no one knew that the old man had pushed down the confinement and brought great harm to the great divine priest of judgment. After such a long time, the great divine priest of judgment still could not leave the seat of heavenly black jade. The great divine priest of revelation naturally knew. That was why he said that. The great divine priest of judgment sat on the seat of heavenly black jade that seemed to be condensed from the blood of thousands of people. He supported his chin with his hand and seemed to be thinking. But his violent and powerful head was indeed lowered. He slowly raised his head, and his deep eyes were full of indifference and violence. He looked outside the bead curtain and saw the great divine priest of revelation standing far away. He said, "I can raise my head at any time." In the empty and chilling black Taoist temple, a gust of wind suddenly rose. The people of the West Hill Divine Palace did not know what had happened in the Divine Hall of Judgment. They did not know what the great divine priest of revelation had said and done after entering the Divine Hall of Judgment, nor did they know what this historic meeting meant. They only heard the sound of the wind. The sound of the violent wind was even more terrifying than the hurricane on the East Sea of the Kingdom of Song. It was as if countless giants were roaring and fighting. A storm swept out from the divine hall, blowing the gravel on the stone steps and hitting the stone pillars. People knelt on the ground in fear, but they could not stabilize their bodies at all. After a long time, the sound of the wind stopped, and so did the wind. The great divine priest of revelation walked out of the divine hall of judgment. His body was still stable, and his expression was still calm. But the wrinkles around his eyes seemed to have deepened. People watched in awe as the great divine priest of revelation walked down the stone steps. They found that he did not enter the carriage, but walked to the highest point of Peach Mountain, the holiest white Taoist temple. They were shocked and guessed. The great divine priest of revelation left the divine hall of judgment. He did not return to his own divine hall. Instead, he walked to the place where Haotian Taoism was supreme in the world. The highest and holiest white Taoist temple belonged to the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. People did not know why the great divine priest of revelation went to see the great divine priest of judgment first, and then the hierarch lord. Similarly, they could not see with their own eyes what happened in the sacred white temple. All they heard was countless thunders coming from the white temple and resounding throughout the entire Peach Mountain. There was a light curtain in the deepest part of the white divine hall. The light curtain was composed of the purest Haotian divine flame. It contained unimaginable power and pressure. The light curtain represented Haotian's rule over the world. A figure landed on this holy screen of divine radiance. The figure on the light curtain was extremely tall. It was as if his feet were on the earth, and his head was above the blue sky, forcibly separating heaven and earth. Every word the figure said was like a bolt of lightning. That was the supreme ruler of Haotian Taoism in the world, the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. The great divine priest of revelation bowed slightly to the giant figure on the light curtain. A voice sounded from behind the light curtain. "Revelation, you think too much." This voice was very calm, but when it passed through the holy screen of light, it caused the light to tremble slightly. Then, it turned into the sound of thunder above the ninth heaven. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the giant figure and said calmly, "The Tao addict is the future of the divine hall. Those stupid people actually forced her away. I can't accept it. Hierarch Lord, you kept silent on this matter. In my opinion, it is also very stupid." The great divine priest of West Hill had a high and special status. However, it was still unimaginable for him to say that the hierarch lord was stupid. What was even more unimaginable was that the hierarch lord behind the light curtain was not angry after hearing this. Instead, he fell into a long period of thinking. The Tao addict can't return to the temple. I know. She is already useless. Maybe. The divine hall needs power. She can still be power. Revelation said expressionlessly, "I can see further than you." After the great divine priest of light left, the great divine priest of revelation was naturally the one who could see further and more accurately in the whole Peach Mountain. This was something that even the gigantic figure in the boundless light had to admit. Maybe you are right. The thunder gradually stopped. Revelation left. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 438. The commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Divine Guards, Luokadi, was a tall middle-aged man. When he put on his armor, he looked like a mobile metal fortress. However, when he knelt in front of that screen of light, in front of that enormous figure, he was as humble as a dwarf, as if he was a thin and weak servant. Because he was the most loyal servant of the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. He was the guard dog of the Peach Mountain of the West Hill Divine Palace. The divine hall needs power, more than ever before. Since the red fish has left, you'll be responsible for taking her back. If she no longer has any power, then I'll allow you to kill her for the dignity of the divine hall. Afterwards, you'll have to find some other kind of power. The hierarch lord stood in the light and said calmly. Luokadi kowtowed like a collapsing mountain. The great divine priest of revelation returned to his throne. He gently stroked the throne made of sunflower vines with his old palms and looked at the hundreds of deacons and officials of the revelation department kneeling on the ground of the divine hall. The wrinkles on his face were as deep as the cracks on the cliffs of Peach Mountain. Cheng Lixue waved his hand to dismiss the people who came to greet the great divine priest. Then he walked to the great divine priest and said in a low voice, "It has happened after all." The great divine priest of revelation said, "This is not the big event that I have predicted." Cheng Lixue was shocked and speechless. If the Tao addict's betrayal of the Peach Mountain was not a big event, then what was the big event that the great divine priest predicted would happen to the judicial department? That really big event has not happened yet. The great divine priest of revelation said tiredly, "All the fates in the world are predetermined by Haotian." The wheel of fate in the Buddhism sect actually means the same thing. What should happen is destined to happen, but it will happen later. Perhaps it was because of tiredness, or because of the continuous meetings with the great divine priest of judgment and the hierarch lord, the wrinkles around the great divine priest of revelation's eyes became more and more frightening. Cheng Lixue looked at the wrinkles around the old man's eyes and felt worried. But he did not dare to ask directly. He asked tentatively, "Where is Yi Hongyu now?" The great divine priest of revelation said with a smile, "This kind of thing does not need to be predicted. Since the Tao addict has left the West Hill, she must have gone to Chang'an." Cheng Lixue's expression changed slightly. He didn't understand why the great divine priest was so sure. The Haotian divine light shines on the world. Where else can she live except in Chang'an? The great divine priest of revelation sighed and then said with a smile, "Fortunately, Chang'an is a good city. We can see and learn some interesting things." Cheng Lixue listened to the great divine priest's evaluation of Chang'an city and suddenly thought of his experience at the side gate of the academy. He frowned slightly and said, "That is indeed an interesting city. He Mingqi actually sensed Ning Kei's divine skill earlier than me when Ning Kei fought with Lu Yiqing at the side gate of the academy. He Mingqi was the disciple of Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang. At the side door of the academy, Ning Kei had slashed at Lu Yiqing with his blade and the divine light had shone brightly. The cultivators present could not understand it at all. Only Cheng Lixue and He Mingqi had reacted. Cheng Lixue crashed through the wall of the carriage. He Mingqi crushed the carriage wheel. Cheng Lixue was the Grand Master of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace. It was not surprising that he could judge Ning Kei's divine skill so quickly. How could He Mingqi do the same? Recalling the scene at that time, Cheng Lixue frowned and said, "I can confirm that He Mingqi's state should be higher than mine. He is definitely not as weak as the rumors say." For hundreds of years, the greatest wish of the West Hill Divine Palace has been to invite the South School of Haotian back. Other than the boring dignity and reputation, of course, it is also because the people in the South School are extraordinary. Since younger brother Qingshan is the nation master of Tang, how can his successor be as weak as the rumors say? The great divine priest of revelation said slowly, "I don't know how the Tao addict's trip to Chang'an will affect the relationship between the Divine Hall and the South School. After all, it is a matter for the future." Cheng Lixue thought about what had happened in the Divine Hall and the attitudes of the Hierarch Lord and the great divine priest of judgment. He said bitterly, "I think it will be difficult for the Tao addict to return to Peach Mountain." The great divine priest of revelation shook his head and said, "She will come back eventually." Cheng Lixue was puzzled and said, "Why are you so sure?" The great divine priest of revelation sighed and said, "If she doesn't return to Peach Mountain, how can the destined event of the judicial department happen?" Summer came to West Hill, and so did Chang'an. The early summer in Chang'an was not unbearably hot. However, the sun in the sky was so hot that people began to feel annoyed. The bluestone slabs in the afternoon began to heat up. The renovation of the Yanming Lake was still going on. In order to finish the project before the arrival of summer, the construction team greatly accelerated under the pressure of money and the Fish Dragon gang. From morning to night, the sound of knocking and grinding echoed in the house by the lake. Fortunately, the original residents had already moved away. Otherwise, they would be tortured by the noise as the weather got hotter. Who knew what kind of conflicts would occur? As time went by, the project entered the final stage. Ning Ke took the tactical array drawing carefully drawn by seventh sister and began to go deep into the construction. After all, the money was in place. Mr. Chi of the Fish Dragon Gang was too famous. Therefore, although the construction workers thought that Ning Ke's design was unreasonable, they did not make too much resistance. The renovation of the house by the lake gradually took shape, and Seventh Sister's tactical array gradually took shape. Then it was hidden among the flowers and plants on the white walls. The project was not finished. Ning Ke and Sang Sang still lived in the old brush pen shop. Knowing that they were going to move, the merchants on Lin 47th Street were relieved, but they could not help but feel a little sad. They thought that if this bigwig left, the men in black from the Fish Dragon Gang would definitely not volunteer to maintain the security here, and the government runners of the Chang and local government would definitely not come here several times a day. Ning Ke did not know what people were thinking. He was really busy these days. He had to study in the back of the mountain of the academy, keep an eye on the renovation of the lakeside, and often go to the palace. The purpose of entering the palace, of course, was to enter the small wooden building. He had to shoulder the safety of the whole Chang and city, and it was related to his plan. Therefore, he had to get familiar with the God-stunning array as soon as possible. Everyone praised his talent in talisman Taoism, and talisman Taoism was originally an interlinked skill. According to reason, he should be able to master the formation that his master Yen Sei left for him very soon. However, it was a pity that his talent seemed to be wasted too much on talisman Taoism and various other skills, and he didn't leave much for the formation. However, Ning Ke had never been a person who gave up when faced with difficulties. Since he had to understand and master the big tactical array, these frustrations would not affect him at all. He took out the usual means of making up for his shortcomings with diligence and splitting books with a knife. As long as he had time, he would go to the palace to learn. His Majesty greatly appreciated his attitude and allowed him to enter the palace at any time. When he walked out of the small building wearily, the emperor would not let him go, but would take him to the imperial study. After entering the palace for more than 10 times, he became familiar with the leader of the Yulin royal guards, the bodyguards, the eunuchs and the palace maids, and even with the empress who ground ink in the imperial study every day. However, he was still not very familiar with the big tactical array of Chang and city. However, this did not mean that he did not gain some benefits from it. Other than some benefits that could not be told to others, the biggest benefit he gained was the countless ancient trees by the Yanming Lake and the things that were continuously sent to the courtyard. The purchase document and the land deed of the house by the Yanming Lake were written with Chao Xiaoshu's name. However, such a big movement could not be hidden from too many people. Li Yu was the first to know about this, so she gave Ning Ke a gift that was absolutely worthy of the identity of the princess of the Tang Empire. The numerous ancient trees that were transplanted by the Yanming Lake were all dug out from her own fiefdom. This was really a great deal, and it could not be bought even with money. His Majesty and the Empress also knew that he was building a new house. The Empress chose a lot of antiques from the palace treasury as a reward, while His Majesty rewarded Ning Ke with many calligraphy treasures. This was the only thing that Ning Ke was not satisfied with. Time gradually passed, and Chang and city changed from early summer to midsummer. The cicadas in the academy became louder, and the heat in the city gradually rose. The renovation project by the Yanming Lake was officially completed. More than 10 houses that used to be separated were opened up, and the old walls that were softened by the lake air were repainted. The narrow alley between the houses was transformed into a stone path in the garden. Flowers and plants were in full bloom, which was very quiet and beautiful. The merchants on the Lin 47th Street plucked up their courage. Boss Wu and Aunt Wu, who sold the fake antique shop, took the lead and invited Ning Kai and Sang Sang to a farewell feast. Their time on the Lin 47th Street was finally over. That night, Ning Kai and Sang Sang moved to the house by the Yanming Lake. All the furniture had been bought by the brothers of the Fish Dragon Gang, so Sang Sang did not have a headache about how to fill such a large yard. Under the strong request of Mr. Qi, Ning Kai kept the old brush pen shop. Anyway, Chao Xiaoshu had waived his rent for many years. However, the old brush pen shop would not sell calligraphy anymore. Thinking about it, when the spring rain fell next year, there would be no young calligraphers in the shop called the old brush pen shop, and there would be no middle-aged people holding umbrellas outside the shop. Accompanied by cicadas and unknown insects, Ning Kai and Sang Sang strolled on the stone path by the Yanming Lake. The beautiful houses behind them were their new homes. Countless ancient trees by the lake made the stone path and the houses extremely quiet. The lake wind passed through them, and the temperature seemed to be a lot lower. Compared with the stuffy heat in the streets of Chang'an, it was a completely different world. Sang Sang thought of the picture of Ning Kai lying on the bamboo chair outside the back door in the summer 2 years ago, constantly soaking himself with well water and chatting with the neighbors. She could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. I never thought that we could live in such a big house. When they lived in a cave in Min Mountain, they lived in a tree house, and they lived in a small courtyard in the city of Wei. They had imagined for many times what kind of big house they would live in when they were rich. Now when they strolled in their own big house by the lake, they realized how shabby their imagination was. "It's good, isn't it?" Ning Kai asked. Sang Sang nodded and said, "It's better than very good." Fuck, there's one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Sang Sang was puzzled and asked, "Then will the imperial court agree to buy the house by the lake? I'm in charge of the array in Chang'an City, not to mention this lake." Ning Kai continued, "The reason why I sold everything I had to buy the lakeside house was because of this lake. The big tactical array in Chang'an City has never been activated, but it has been operating slowly. Yanming Lake, as the left eye of Qi, naturally needs to gather some Qi of heaven and earth. Although the self-uniform power of heaven and earth is too strong, the concentration here cannot be too special, but it is good for cultivation." Sang Sang nodded, not really understanding. "The most important thing is, if I can really control the big tactical array in Chang'an City, I can connect the tactical array designed by Seventh Sister for us with the God-stunning array." Ning Kai said, "At that time, I don't need to activate the God-stunning array to startle the world. I also have enough ability to borrow the power of Chang'an City and plant a lotus on someone." Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "It sounds very difficult." Ning Kai thought about the learning in the palace these days and said bitterly, "It's more difficult than very difficult." Sang Sang said, "Young master, I believe you can definitely do it." "I hope so, but there is not much time." Ning Kai looked at the lotus field not far away and thought that the green lotus leaves would all turn into withered yellow leaves in autumn, and that person would also return to Chang'an. He could not help but fall silent. "Let's go to the lotus field over there," he said. Sang Sang stood up from beside him, walked to the stern, and rowed again. "Let's row." Ning Kai's song sounded on the boat on the lake. Yanming Lake was a public forest land owned by the government and was not allowed to be sold. It was impossible for it to become Ning Kai's private property. However, he had bought all the houses by the lake. The imperial court would not take it too seriously because of his status. Yanming Mountain on the south bank was not famous and there were very few tourists. Therefore, Yanming Lake was in fact the private lake of his house. There was only one boat floating on the beautiful lake. Sealing up such a beautiful scenery and turning it into a private garden that could only be enjoyed by themselves would cut off the opportunity for the people of Chang'an to get close to it. Of course, it would seem a little unkind and even morally questionable. However, Ning Ke and his handmaiden were originally nouveau riches and had never been kind people, so they did not care much about moral issues. The lotus field in the middle of the lake was planted by people hired by Ning Quebec. After these days, the lotus leaves were already lush and the flowers were in full bloom after being nourished by the lake mud. Sang Sang moved the oars, and the boat slowly sailed into the lotus field. As far as the eye could see, besides the green lotus leaves and pink lotus flowers, nothing else could be seen. It was as if they had entered a quiet maze, a graceful world that was completely different from the scorching summer. The round green lotus leaves were like cattail leaf fans lying on the surface of the water. They stretched out in mid-air and touched the walls of the boat from time to time, making a rustling sound. The lotus flowers were in full bloom by the side of the boat. The pink, white, soft and smooth petals were so close to the two that they could even clearly smell a faint fragrance. Ning Ke leaned on the bow of the boat and looked at the lotus leaves that brushed past him. He held a cattail leaf fan in his hand and waved it gently. His eyes were slightly narrowed as he admired the beautiful scenery of the lotus field. At the same time, he meditated and cultivated. He used the qi cultivation method that he learned when he was in seclusion in the cliff cave to constantly breathe in and out the aura of heaven and earth between the lake and accumulate the Great Spirit in his body. The drop of liquid that was condensed by the Great Spirit in his body was now rounder and fuller. It looked like a drop of water rolling on the lotus leaves and could fall into the lake at any time. The boat went deep into the lotus field. The house by the lake and even the Yanming mountain on the south bank were all covered by the lotus leaves. Sang Sang put down the oars and sat beside Ning Quebec. She reached out to the side of the boat and picked a lotus head among the leaves. Her little hand slightly tore the fresh lotus that had not been formed for a long time and picked out the pale green lotus seed. She carefully peeled the lotus seed and picked out the thin lotus core inside and then sent it to Ning Ke's lips. Ning Ke did not open his eyes and ate the lotus seed with her fingertips. When his mouth was full of fragrance, he suddenly opened his eyes and said, "The first lotus core is not bitter. Why bother to pick it out?" Sang Sang had already processed several lotus seeds and fed them all into his mouth. She did not listen to him and still carefully picked out the lotus core. "I heard that the lotus core can be used as medicine. We can't waste it," she said with her head down. Ning Ke was speechless and said, "Anyway, we are a family with a big house now. Why do we have to be so thrifty? If you have the time, you might as well let me write a few more calligraphy pieces." Sang Sang thought for a while and thought it was true. She looked at the lotus core on her knees and made up her mind. She threw the lotus core into the lake and washed her hands in the lake water. Then she walked back to the stern. "Where are you going?" Ning Ke looked at the boat swaying and asked in confusion. Sang Sang said, "When we go back, I will let you write a few more calligraphy pieces. I spent all my money to buy this house. Even if the palace gave me a lot of things, I still owe Mr. Qi a few thousand taels of silver last night." Ning Ke said helplessly, "There is no hurry, right?" Sang Sang laughed and said, "I'm just kidding. Tell me, where are we going at this time?" Ning Ke said, "Just paddle." The boat swam freely in the lotus field. Ning Ke opened the package beside him and took out the small iron can. He carefully touched the deep straight lines on it and found that he really did not have the ability of sixth brother. He casually threw the small iron can into the lake. These days, sixth brother made a total of more than 30 small iron cans, and now he was still making them in the back of the mountain of the academy. As long as there was time, there would be a continuous supply. The small iron pot was filled with enough weight of scrap iron, which increased the power of the test. Moreover, when thrown into the lake, it could be guaranteed that it would not float. The relatively troublesome thing was the fire fu in the small iron pot. Although Ning Kei's psyche power was much stronger than that of ordinary cultivators, it still made him feel a little tired to make more than 30 fu papers with the most powerful talisman power. Sang Sang rowed. He leaned against the bow of the boat and threw the small iron pot into the lake from time to time, ignoring the fish on the lotus leaves. The boat swam freely and he threw it casually. This scene seemed to be comfortable and natural, but in fact, he firmly remembered the position of the small iron pot in the lake. The boat moved among the lotuses and the green leaves. The lake water suddenly broke, making a clear and pleasant sound. It was like frogs jumping from the boat into the lake from time to time. When the boat sailed out of the lotus field, the small iron pot had completely sunk into the lake. At this time, the sky was covered by rain and clouds, and no one knew when it was dusk. Ning Kei stood at the bow of the boat and looked at the shore that was getting closer and closer. There was a steep but not high Yanming mountain on the shore. He squinted his eyes and felt the lake breeze, which was much cooler than yesterday, caressing his cheeks. It was very comfortable. The boat reached the south bank, and the two went ashore into the forest. They picked up the grass along the way and finally reached the peak of Yanming Mountain. The peak was not high, but they could overlook the lake. Ning Kei looked at the courtyard on the north bank of the lake and looked at the looming lines between the trees and eaves. He silently compared it with the tactical array left by Seventh Sister in his heart and confirmed that there was no difference. If Haotian can give me enough time to connect this lake with the God-stunning array, then I believe that I can kill anyone I want here. Just after he said this, it seemed that Haotian could no longer tolerate his arrogance. A light suddenly flashed in the depths of the dense rain clouds in the sky, and then there was a rumbling thunder. The rain fell without warning and instantly turned into countless water curtains, covering the entire Chang'an city. Yanming Lake and Yanming Mountain were silent in the rain. At the moment when the lightning flashed and thunder roared, Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella as fast as she could. Ning Kei looked up at the black umbrella and said, "It is easy to be struck to death with an umbrella in a thunderstorm." Sang Sang said, "You said that when we were young, but we were not struck to death." Ning Kei sighed and said, "It is indeed a very magical world." Then close your eyes and feel it. The rain was pouring. Thunder and lightning intertwined. Sang Sang stood on the edge of the cliff, facing the turbulent lake water. She closed her eyes and held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly. After some time, Ning Kei asked with a serious expression, "How do you feel?" Sang Sang opened her eyes, which were brighter than the lightning in the rain clouds. "I can feel everything. That's all for today. See you tomorrow. I am really not used to writing during the day. My eyes are always blurred, but it seems to be efficient. I hope it can continue. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 440. Sang Sang was a little handmaiden. Sang Sang was not an ordinary handmaiden. She had an amazing memory. She could easily remember all the numbers she had seen since she started to count. This could be testified by the soldiers and civilians in the city of Wei. She was very smart. This could be testified by Chen Pipi, who had walked out of the old brush pen shop several times. Chen Pipi was a genius recognized by both Haotian Taoism and Chang'an Academy. The reason why Sang Sang often seemed a little clumsy or even dull was not that her brain was not good. In Ning Kei's words, she was just a little lazy and did not want to think about many things. Ning Kei knew more about Song Song's special features than anyone else in the world, such as her intelligence and her unique ability. However, in the past 10 years, he had not thought about or touched these special features of Sang Sang. This was his instinctive choice. Because he could not understand why he had picked up a little baby girl from a pile of corpses by the roadside of the wasteland in Hebei County. The baby girl seemed to be hiding some secrets, which made him feel a little scared. It was not until the great divine priest of light escaped from the West Hill and came to Chang'an City and took Sang Sang as his disciple. Sang Sang became the next great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Kei then realized that this was the mark of fate on Sang Sang. This was the lucky chance of the little baby girl. Fate and secrets had already appeared in front of him, so there was no more fear. He could only admit and accept it. In the past 6 months, Ning Kei no longer avoided it. Instead, he began to train or explore Sang Sang's potential in cultivation. Today, there was a thunderstorm by the Yanming Lake. Sang Sang stood on the edge of the cliff, holding the big black umbrella. She said that she felt everything. 2 years ago, on the journey from the city of Wei to Chang'an City, Liu Qingchen once told Ning Kei that when a cultivator first comprehended the range of the qi of heaven and earth that he could feel represented the aptitude of that cultivator. It could even predict which step he would take in the future. Some cultivators could feel a pond, and some could feel a lake. When the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, was enlightened, he felt a big river. What Ning Kei felt was a warm ocean. However, he had never told anyone about this because even he did not believe that his cultivation potential was stronger than the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai's. In fact, the various stories that happened during his cultivation journey proved that he was wrong. Sang Sang said that she had sensed everything, but it did not mean that she was more powerful than Liu Bai. It meant something else, something that only she and Ning Kei could understand. "You're trying it now?" Sang Sang handed him the big black umbrella. Ning Kei took the big black umbrella. His palms and the umbrella handle were full of rainwater. The psyche power was slowly released from his sense of perception and passed through his palm into the handle of the big black umbrella. Then, it quietly covered the oil-stained surface of the big black umbrella. It passed through the majestic rainstorm and diffused towards Yanming Lake at the bottom of the cliff. Ning Kei also felt a lot. He sensed the lake that was jumping restlessly like boiling water after being hit by the storm. He sensed the lotus leaves in the lotus field that were rattling restlessly like drums. He sensed the frightened frogs under the lotus leaves. He sensed the small iron pots that looked like stones in the depths of the lake. Ning Kei looked up at the sky and tilted the black umbrella backward. The heavy rain immediately soaked his body. The dark clouds in the sky rolled and squeezed. After the dark clouds, there were more dark clouds. Countless raindrops poured down from the layers of dark clouds, looking like countless old black snakes biting each other crazily. Suddenly, an extremely thick and straight bolt of lightning crossed the entire sky from the northwest of Chang'an City without warning. It instantly tore apart the rolling rain clouds. The thunder came soon after and exploded above Yanming Lake. Boom! It was unknown whether it was the power of the thunder or something else, but the water of Yanming Lake suddenly fluctuated. Water splashed everywhere and the lotus branches shook violently, as if they would break at any time. Ning Kei looked down at the surface of the lake that was surging like a fountain. He looked at the waves and broken branches that were gradually dispersing towards the shore. He suddenly said, "Yes." Sang Sang wiped the rain off her face and did not speak. After that terrifying bolt of lightning, the sky seemed to have officially begun to get angry. Bolts of lightning came one after another, illuminating Chang'an City, which was originally covered in darkness by the dark clouds. The dull thunder did not show any signs of stopping. The continuous explosions did not give the people in the city any chance to breathe. In the violent thunder, Ning Ke held the black umbrella and looked at the north shore of Yanming Lake. He said something, but because the thunder was too loud and the rain was too violent, only he could hear it. He pointed to the courtyard on the north shore and said, "Start from the courtyard." He pointed to the shaking lake and said, "Continue in the lake." Then he looked at Sang Sang and the Yanming peak under his feet and said, "End here." Sang Sang took the big black umbrella from him and said, "Don't let him go up the mountain." Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "I'll try my best. If I still can't kill him in the lake and don't let him go up the mountain, then I'll go down the mountain." Sang Sang said, "What about me if you go down the mountain?" Ning Ke said, "You watch me from the mountain." Sang Sang said, "I can help you. You can definitely help me, but that's before I go down the mountain. And I believe that there will be many people watching that day, such as second brother, so you'll be safe." After saying this, Ning Ke walked down the mountain. The heavy rain in midsummer came abruptly and left quickly without any reluctance. When Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked to the lake at the foot of the mountain, the rain stopped. After the rain stopped, they returned to the boat. Ning Ke picked up the boat with one hand and poured out the accumulated rainwater in the cabin. The boat wandered on the Yanming Lake that had calmed down again. After the heavy rain, the air on the lake became extremely clean and fresh. The heat of midsummer was swept away, and the lake wind was filled with the sweet smell of broken green branches. The boat sailed into a corner of the lotus field. Here, the lotus branches were broken, the lotus flowers were broken, and the lake water was turbid. It looked very miserable. No matter how powerful the thunder and lightning in the sky was, it could not cause such a scene. Some traces of iron slag could be vaguely seen on the broken lotus leaves floating on the lake. Ning Ke looked at the broken lotus branches in the lake and said with a smile, "Keep the broken lotus, and listen to the thunder." Tuyang City was located in the northeast border of the Tang Empire. It was near Min Mountain and the wilderness. Even in midsummer, it was extremely cool. After the summer, the rain gradually increased, but thunder was rarely heard. There was more rain, but it didn't mean that people could dig lakes and plant lotuses like in the south. Only the general's mansion had a lotus pond in Tuyang City. Only a few people could see the wilted lotus. Naturally, not many people in this border town would lament about the wilted lotus like the poets and scholars. However, when the people in Tuyang City saw the broken Tang Empire cavalry in the meadow outside the city, they could not help but be shocked and even shocked to the point of speechlessness. For many years, the Tang Empire's army had not suffered any losses. The northeast border military led by General Xiaofan had never lost a battle. Why was the cavalry outside the city a broken army? In fact, this was just a misunderstanding that was not good. The Tang Empire cavalry on the meadow outside Tuyang City did not lose the battle in the wilderness. It was just that after a long journey, their armor was stained with dust, their horses were tired, and the people were tired. Most importantly, all of their faces were filled with numbness. The team was filled with an atmosphere of decline, so they were mistaken for a broken army. The reason why the Tang Empire soldiers were numb was the desolate man in the forest not far away. The man's leather robe had long been tattered. Blood mixed with dust was smeared on the clothes that he had stolen from somewhere. Tang said, "If you could understand that fighting is ultimately a personal matter, maybe you would not have made so many mistakes and would not be as old as you are now." In midsummer, the grass was long and the eagles were flying. There were countless wounds on Tang's body. Blood was still dripping, falling on the grass and starting to burn. Xiaofan covered his mouth with his fist and began to cough. There was blood flowing from his fingers, like an injured eagle on the rock wall. Eagles were generally called eagles. However, eagles could grow old, but humans could not. And to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.